Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. I never believed in the paranormal or cryptids. Even as a kid, when my friends would get freaked out about ghost stories at sleepovers, I was always the one saying, "That's not real," or explaining how it was probably just the wind or a raccoon. My wife Sarah used to tease me about being so closed-minded. She'd call me her professional skeptic. But what happened to us in Olympic National Forest changed everything, and I still can't explain it no matter how hard I try. It was February 2016, and Sarah and I had planned this little getaway to Washington State. We live in Portland, Oregon, so it wasn't a huge trip, just a long weekend to escape the city and enjoy some nature. We're both pretty outdoorsy people. We hike regularly, camp when we can, but we'd never been to the Olympic rainforest before, and everyone kept telling us how beautiful it was. We'd spent most of the day exploring the Mohow rainforest. It was stunning. Everything was so green and alive even in February. The moss hanging from the trees made it feel like we were in some kind of fairy tale forest. We took a bunch of pictures, did a few short hikes, just really soaked it all in. By late afternoon we were pretty tired and decided to head back to our rental cabin. The weather was typical for that time of year. Overcast, misty, with that damp chill that just seeps into your bones. It wasn't raining heavily, but there was this fine mist in the air that made everything look slightly hazy. We'd been driving for maybe 20 minutes on Upper Mohow Road. It's this winding road that cuts through dense forest, but we'd hit a relatively straight stretch. I remember checking the time. It was around 5:30 in the evening. The sun was setting, but it wasn't dark yet, just that grayish twilight that makes everything look a bit flat and strange. Sarah was fiddling with the radio, trying to find a station that wasn't just static. I was driving slower than usual because the road was wet and I wasn't familiar with the area. That's when it happened. I still get goosebumps thinking about it. About 100 yards ahead of us, something moved at the edge of the forest on the north side of the road. At first, I thought it was a bear. We'd been warned there were black bears in the area, but as we got closer, I realized it was standing upright, way upright. My brain kept trying to make sense of what I was seeing. A person in a coat? No, too big. A park ranger? No, no uniform. And again, way too big. I slowed the car down without even thinking about it. Sarah must have noticed my face because she stopped messing with the radio and looked at me, then followed my gaze out the windshield. Then this thing just stepped out onto the road. I've never seen anything like it. It was massive. I'm 6 feet tall, and this creature was at least 2 feet taller than me, maybe 8 feet in total. It was covered in dark hair or fur, sort of a deep brown or black that blended with the shadows of the forest. The build was powerful, not fat, but incredibly broad-shouldered and thick, like a linebacker crossed with a grizzly bear. It didn't walk like a person in a costume. That's what keeps coming back to me. The movement was so fluid, so natural. It took these huge strides, just 3 steps, and crossed the entire width of the road. The road's not narrow there either. It's a standard 2-lane forest road. The whole thing lasted maybe 5 seconds. It never looked at our car, never acknowledged us at all, just purposefully crossed the road and disappeared into the woods on the south side, heading in the direction of the Mohow River. I hit the brakes and our car came to a stop. For a few seconds, Sarah and I just sat there in complete silence. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. Finally, I looked over at Sarah and her face was completely white. She turned to me at the exact same moment and whispered, "Did you see that?" "Yeah," I said. "What the hell was that?" "It looked like..." She hesitated, like she was afraid to say it out loud. "Bigfoot," I finished for her. And as soon as I said it, I felt ridiculous. I don't believe in Bigfoot. I've always thought all those sightings were just bears or people in costumes or folks with overactive imaginations. But what else could I call what we'd just seen? I put the car in park and we just sat there for a minute, both trying to process what had happened. I kept replaying it in my mind, trying to find some rational explanation, but there wasn't one. We both saw it. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a person. It wasn't anything I could explain. "Should we look for tracks?" Sarah asked. Her voice was still shaky. Part of me wanted to just drive away as fast as possible, but the scientist in me needed to investigate. I grabbed my phone to use as a flashlight and we got out of the car. The air felt different when we stepped outside, heavy and unusually quiet. No bird sounds, no rustling in the underbrush, just silence. I don't know if that was real or if my mind was playing tricks on me because I was so freaked out. We walked to the spot where the creature had crossed. The ground at the edge of the road was soft from the constant moisture, but I couldn't make out any distinct footprints, just some disturbed earth and broken ferns. I tried to peer into the woods on both sides, but it was getting darker by the minute and the forest was incredibly dense. There was no clear path, no trail where it had entered or exited, just thick underbrush, massive ferns and trees growing so close together that I couldn't imagine how something that large could move through them so quickly and quietly. I remember Sarah grabbing my arm suddenly and whispering, "James, let's go, please." There was real fear in her voice, and honestly, I felt it too. Standing there on that empty road, with the forest closing in around us and darkness falling, I've never felt so exposed and vulnerable. We practically ran back to the car. Once inside, I locked the doors immediately, which seems silly in retrospect. Like a car door would stop something that size if it wanted to get to us. I turned the car around and drove maybe 10 miles over the speed limit, all the way back to our cabin. Neither of us said much during the drive. What was there to say? We both knew what we'd seen, but it didn't make any sense. That night at the cabin, we finally talked about it. We described what we'd seen to each other separately, without influencing each other's recollection. Our descriptions matched perfectly. The height, the color, the way it moved, everything. That's when I realized this wasn't some shared hallucination or misidentification. We had seen something real. I tried to sleep that night, but I kept jolting awake, thinking I heard something outside the cabin. Every time the wind made the branches scrape against the roof, I'd sit straight up in bed. Sarah wasn't sleeping either. Around 3 in the morning, we just gave up and sat at the kitchen table with cups of tea, talking in low voices. "What do we do with this information?" Sarah asked. "Do we tell someone?" I thought about it. And who would we tell? The park rangers, the police? They'd think we were crazy or drunk. "What about one of those Bigfoot research groups?" she suggested. I shook my head. "I don't know. I've always thought those people were, nuts," Sarah finished for me. "Yeah, me too. But now we're those people, James. We saw something we can't explain." The next morning we packed up early and headed home. We cut our trip short by a day, but neither of us wanted to stay. The magic of the forest was gone, replaced by this unsettling feeling that we were being watched. As we drove out, I kept scanning the tree line, half expecting to see that massive figure again. But there was nothing. Back home in Portland, life went on. We didn't tell anyone about what we'd seen. How could we? Our friends knew me as the rational one, the skeptic. I'd lose all credibility if I started talking about Bigfoot sightings, so we kept it to ourselves. But it changed me. I started researching. At first, I was looking for any explanation that could rationalize what we'd seen. Was there some kind of bear that could walk upright for that distance? Some unknown species, a human in an incredibly realistic costume? But the more I researched, the more I found similar accounts from all over the Pacific Northwest. Regular people, teachers, doctors, forest rangers, people with nothing to gain and potentially a lot to lose by sharing their experiences. I found myself going down internet rabbit holes, reading about the Patterson-Gimlin film, the countless sightings in Washington state, the Native American legends about wild men of the woods. I even ordered a few books, keeping them hidden like they were something shameful. Sarah caught me one night, about 3 months after our trip, reading a book called Sasquatch Legend Meets Science. She didn't tease me like I expected. She just sat down next to me and said, "I still think about it too." For years, we kept our experience private. We'd talk about it occasionally, just between the two of us, going over the details again and again, the way it moved, how impossibly big it was, the silence of the forest afterward. Sometimes I'd convince myself that maybe we had been mistaken, but then Sarah would describe it again, and I'd remember that moment of shared recognition in the car. We saw something real. It wasn't until last year that we finally told anyone else. We were watching TV one night, and this documentary about Bigfoot investigations in Olympic National Forest came on. They were interviewing people who had sightings in the exact same area where we'd been. One woman described seeing a large bipedal creature cross Umpqua Road in 3 strides, heading toward the river. Her description was eerily similar to our experience. Sarah and I looked at each other, and I could see she had tears in her eyes. "We're not crazy," she whispered. That night, I wrote an email to the research group featured in the documentary. I tried to be as detailed and factual as possible, describing exactly what we saw, when and where we saw it, and the conditions at the time. I even included our contact information, something I'd never normally do. They responded the next day, and we ended up speaking with a researcher named Dr. Miller for over 2 hours. He didn't treat us like we were crazy. He asked specific, intelligent questions and took our account seriously. He told us that there had been multiple sightings in that exact area over the years, often in late winter or early spring. I still don't know what to call what we saw that day. Sasquatch? Bigfoot? An undiscovered primate species? All I know is that it was real, and it fundamentally changed how I view the world and the limits of my own knowledge. I've gone from being someone who dismissed these accounts outright to someone who has to live with the uncomfortable reality that there are things in this world that science hasn't explained yet. That day on Umpqua Road shattered my certainty. Sometimes I wish I could go back to being the person I was before, the professional skeptic who had neat, tidy explanations for everything. But then I remember the awe I felt watching that creature move through its forest home with such power and grace, and I realize I wouldn't trade that moment of wonder for anything, even if it means living with questions I may never have answers to. Story 2. I've been holding this in for 10 years now, and I need to finally write it down. Most people would think I'm crazy or making this up, but I swear on everything I care about, what I saw that night in the bush was real. So back when I was 18, my cousin Liam and I went to stay at our granddad's place in Wapiro Bay. If you don't know where that is, it's this remote area near Gisborne on the east coast of New Zealand. My granddad's homestead sits right where the forest meets the coast. It's beautiful but properly isolated. No close neighbors, spotty cell service, the works. Granddad had lived there for decades, this tough old Maori man who knew everything about the land. He was always telling stories about the area, but he never mentioned anything weird living in those woods. At least not until after what happened. It was mid-summer, January, and the days were long and hot. We'd been staying with him for about a week, mostly fishing and helping fix up his property. This particular evening, Liam got the idea to go spotlighting for eels in the creek that ran through Grandad's property and into the forest. "The big ones come out at night," he said. "We could catch some for breakfast." I was keen for an adventure, so we grabbed our headlamps, a couple of spears Grandad had for this exact purpose, and a small chili bin to bring back whatever we caught. Grandad just nodded when we told him where we were going. "Back before midnight," was all he said, "and stick to the track." The sun was just setting when we headed out, that golden hour where everything looks magical. The track followed the creek into the bush, and once we got under the canopy, it got dark fast. The only sounds were our footsteps on the dirt path the gentle flow of the creek, and the occasional bird call. About a kilometre in, we started seeing small eels in the water, but nothing worth catching. Liam was convinced the bigger ones would be further upstream, so we kept going. The track got narrower with thick bush pressing in from both sides. Our headlamps cut through the darkness, but they only lit up a small area ahead of us. Everything beyond that was just black. After walking for maybe an hour, we reached a spot where the creek widened into a small pool. We checked it out, but still only found small eels. "This is useless," I said. "Let's head back." Liam agreed, and we turned around. That's when we heard it, this weird squealing noise coming from the bush to our right. It wasn't super loud, but it was definitely not a sound I recognized. "Probably just a pig," Liam said, shrugging it off. "Wild boars are common in New Zealand bush, so that made sense." We kept walking, but the squealing continued, sometimes stopping for a few seconds before starting again. It sounded like it was moving parallel to us, keeping pace. "That pig's following us," I said, trying to joke about it, but I was starting to feel uneasy. "Yeah, weird," Liam replied, and I could tell he was getting nervous too. We picked up our pace a bit, and the squealing got louder, more insistent. Then it changed to this deep grunting sound that made the hair on my neck stand up. This definitely wasn't a pig. About halfway back to Grandad's, the sound suddenly stopped. We paused, both of us scanning the bush with our headlamps. "What do you reckon that was?" Liam whispered. I was about to answer when I noticed something at the edge of my light beam. About 15 meters off the track, standing between two large trees, was a dark silhouette. It was completely still, just watching us. "Liam," I said quietly. "Over there." He turned his headlamp in that direction, and we both froze. The figure was tall, taller than any person I'd ever seen, maybe 2 meters high. It was broad-shouldered and covered in thick, matted hair that looked black or dark gray in our light. But it was the eyes that got me. They caught the light and reflected back this intense orange-yellow color. Like fire, they were fixed right on us, unblinking. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. Neither of us moved or spoke. Then Liam's headlamp caught more details. A broad, flat nose, and when its mouth opened slightly, I saw teeth. Not human teeth, they were pointed like a dog's, but bigger. Its hands hung at its sides, and they were enormous, like dinner plates with long fingers. The whole thing was just wrong. Like someone had mashed together parts of different animals with something almost human, but not quite. For what felt like forever, we just stared at each other, us and this thing. Then it made this sound, a loud huffing noise that seemed to come from deep in its chest. It was like a warning. Without any sudden movements, it turned and pushed back into the thick bush. The vegetation moved and shook as it disappeared, and we could hear branches snapping as it moved away. "Run," Liam said, his voice cracking. We sprinted all the way back to Grandad's house, not stopping once. I've never run so fast in my life. My lungs were burning, and I kept imagining that thing right behind us, reaching for us with those massive hands. When we burst through the door, Grandad was sitting at the kitchen table drinking tea. He looked at us, sweaty, out of breath, and obviously terrified, and just raised an eyebrow. "Did you see something out there?" he asked, way too calmly. Between gasps, we described what we'd seen. I expected him to laugh or tell us we were imagining things. Instead, he nodded like we'd just told him it was raining outside. "Ah, you met the Mohow man," he said, pouring himself more tea. "I was wondering if he'd show himself to you." "The what?" I stammered. "Mohow man. Some call it Mairo. Been around these parts as long as anyone can remember." He said it so matter-of-factly, like he was talking about the neighbor's dog. "You've seen it before?" Liam asked. "Many times," Grandad replied. "First time when I was younger than you two. He protects the forest. Ancient guardian, that one. Doesn't bother you if you respect the land." We peppered him with questions. What was it exactly? Why hadn't he warned us? Were we in danger? Grandad just shrugged. It's just part of this place. Always has been. Didn't think you'd believe me if I told you before you saw it yourself. He wasn't worried at all, which somehow made it worse. This thing was real enough that my grandfather knew about it, had seen it multiple times, and considered it normal. That night, I barely slept. Every sound from outside, every rustling branch or animal call, had me sitting bolt upright, expecting to see those orange-yellow eyes staring in through the window. I kept thinking about those hands, imagining them reaching for the doorknob or sliding the window open. The next morning, Liam and I went to look at the spot where we'd seen the creature. In daylight, with birds singing and sun filtering through the trees, it was hard to believe what had happened, but we found massive footprints in the soft earth by the creek, at least twice the size of my own feet, with what looked like claw marks at the ends of the toes, and there were broken branches high up on the trees, way higher than a person could reach. For the rest of our stay, we didn't go into the bush again, especially not at night. Grandad seemed amused by our caution, but didn't push us. On our last night there, sitting on the porch watching the sunset, Grandad told us more about the Mohow man. According to him, these creatures had been in New Zealand since before people arrived. Some local Maori considered them kaitiaki, guardians of special places. Others thought they were dangerous beings to be avoided. Grandad fell into the first camp. "He's never harmed me," he said. "And I've lived here 40 years. We understand each other. I'm 28 now, and I've never gone back to that specific part of the bush. I've tried researching what we saw, and there are stories about the Mohow man or Maero from all over New Zealand. Descriptions of a large, hairy, humanoid creature living in remote forests. Some accounts match exactly what we saw, others differ in the details. What freaks me out the most isn't just what we saw that night. It's my granddad's reaction, like it was the most normal thing in the world, like we'd just met his eccentric neighbor who keeps to himself. How many times had he seen this creature? How close had it come to his house? Did it watch us when we were outside? I still have nightmares about those eyes staring at me from the darkness. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night convinced I've heard that squealing sound outside my window, even though I live in Auckland now, far from any bush. I've never told this story publicly before. Most people would think I'm making it up or was just a scared kid seeing things in the dark, but I know what I saw. Liam knows too, though he refuses to talk about it anymore. Last year I found out Grandad still leaves food out sometimes at the edge of his property, meat mostly. When I asked him why, he just smiled and said, "For old friends." Whatever that thing was, Mohow man, Maero, or something else entirely, it's still out there in those woods, and my Grandad, for reasons I'll never understand, seems to have made peace with it. Sometimes I wonder if it recognized us that night as Grandad's family, if that's why it just warned us with that huff instead of doing something worse. I wonder if it's watching Grandad's place right now, with those fiery eyes, waiting for the next visitors to wander too far into its territory. And sometimes, on dark nights when I can't sleep, I wonder if there are more of them out there, in other remote parts of the country, watching and waiting from the shadows of the bush. Story 3. Dots. I'm still trying to process what happened to me last October. I've been debating whether to share this for months now, but I need to get it off my chest. Maybe someone out there has seen something similar. Maybe I'm not crazy. This all happened near Frankton, Indiana, where I was working the late shift at a warehouse about 20 minutes from my apartment. So I ride a motorcycle. Nothing fancy, just a second-hand Kawasaki that gets me where I need to go. In October last year, I was finishing up these brutal 11-hour shifts that ended at midnight. The ride home was always peaceful, though. No traffic, just me and the road under a blanket of stars. I usually took this back road that cuts through farmland, mostly cornfields with patches of woods here and there. It's way quicker than the main highway, especially that late. The first incident happened on October 4th. I remember the date because it was my nephew's birthday and I'd missed his party because of work. It was around 1 in the morning and I was exhausted. The temperature had dropped into the low 40s, and even with my leather jacket, the wind chill on the bike was making my fingers numb. I was coming up on this sharp curve. Locals call it Dead Man's Turn, because some teenager crashed his car there back in the 90s. The cornfields on either side were tall, ready for harvest. I'd slowed down to maybe 40 miles per hour to take the curve when I saw it. There was this figure standing at the edge of the cornfield on the right side of the road. At first, my brain tried to make sense of it. Maybe it was a farmer checking his crops at 1 in the morning, in the pitch dark. No way. This thing was huge. I'm 6 feet tall, and this was way bigger than me. It was standing upright like a person, but the proportions were all wrong. The shoulders were too broad, the arms too long. I couldn't make out details in the dark, but I could see its silhouette against the cornfield. Before I could process what I was seeing, it moved. It sort of leaned forward and then... Jesus, that sound. I still get goosebumps thinking about it. It let out this scream that started low and then went impossibly high. It wasn't human. It wasn't an animal I'd ever heard before. It was this piercing shriek that seemed to echo across the entire field. My fight or flight kicked in instantly. I cranked the throttle and took that curve faster than I ever should have. My back tire actually skidded a bit, and for a second, I thought I was going to wipe out. As I straightened out and sped away, I heard it again. That same scream, but more distant this time. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I rode all the way home with my heart feeling like it was going to explode out of my chest. When I finally got to my apartment, my hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the door. I told myself it was an animal, maybe a bear standing on its hind legs. But bears don't get that tall, and they sure as hell don't make sounds like that. I tried to convince myself I was just tired, that my mind was playing tricks on me. I didn't tell anyone about it. What would I say? Hey, I saw a monster on my way home from work. Yeah, right. For the next few days, I took the highway home. It added like 15 minutes to my commute, but I didn't care. I kept replaying that night in my head, trying to rationalize what I'd seen. But on October 11th, I decided to take the back road again. I don't know why. Maybe part of me wanted to prove to myself that I'd imagined the whole thing. This time it was even later, around 2:30 in the morning. We'd had inventory at work, so everyone had to stay late. The moon was nearly full that night, which gave me a false sense of security. I could see the road better, at least. As I approached that same curve, I slowed down way more than necessary. I was doing maybe 25, my eyes scanning the edge of the cornfield where I'd seen the figure before. Nothing. I started to relax a little, thinking maybe I really had imagined it. Then I saw the eyes. About 100 feet off the road, there was a pair of yellow eyes reflecting the light from my headlamp. Not small like a raccoon or possum. These were big, and they were high off the ground, maybe 7 feet up. My blood ran cold. As I got closer, taking the curve at a crawl now, I could make out more of it. The cornfield had been partially harvested in that section, so there was more visibility. The creature was standing there, just watching me. It was massive, at least 7.5 feet tall, maybe more. Its body looked human-ish, but broader, more powerful. The corn around it was tall, probably 6.5 feet, but this thing stood a good foot above it. What happened next still freaks me out. It didn't run, it didn't make any sound, it just watched me. Then, as I was right at the closest point to it in the curve, it turned its head toward the woods behind the field. It was so deliberate, like it was looking for something, or maybe communicating with something else I couldn't see. Then it looked back at me for just a second. Those yellow eyes locked onto me, and I swear it felt like it was seeing right through me. Then it stepped backward into the cornfield and was gone. No rustling, no sound at all. Something that big should have made noise moving through a cornfield, but there was nothing. just silence. I didn't speed away this time. I kept going slowly, my eyes glued to the spot where it had been standing. Part of me was terrified, but another part was curious. I can't explain it. It was like my brain couldn't process what I was seeing, so it wanted more information. But there was nothing else to see. Whatever it was gone. When I got home that night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my computer until dawn, searching for anything about strange creatures in Indiana. Most of what I found was just local legends and campfire stories. But then I stumbled across some forums about Bigfoot sightings in the Midwest. People described seeing tall, humanoid creatures at the edges of forests or fields. Some mentioned yellow eyes. A few even talked about that same high-pitched scream. That's when it hit me. What if what I saw was a Bigfoot? I've never been the type to believe in cryptids or monsters. I always thought those stories were just made up by people who saw a bear in bad lighting or something. But now, I'm not so sure. The thing that gets me is how different the two encounters were. The first time, it seemed startled by me. That scream felt like a warning or maybe even a call to others. But the second time, it was so calm. It knew I was coming. It was waiting for me. I've taken that road a dozen times since then, always at night because of my work schedule. I go slow around that curve every time, scanning the fields, the tree line. I haven't seen it again. But sometimes I get this feeling like I'm being watched, like there's something out there in the dark, just beyond where my headlight reaches. The locals I've talked to haven't been much help. Most just laugh it off when I try to casually bring up strange sightings in the area. One old-timer at the gas station did mention that farmers sometimes find weird footprints in their fields, way bigger than any person's. He blamed it on kids playing pranks, but the way he said it made me think he didn't really believe that explanation. I've thought about setting up a trail cam or something along that stretch of road, but part of me doesn't want confirmation. What if I actually got a clear picture of this thing? What would I do with that information? The strangest part is that I'm not as afraid as I should be. Don't get me wrong. In the moment, I was terrified, but looking back, neither encounter felt threatening. The creature never moved toward me. It never tried to chase me or hurt me. It was just there, existing in its world, which happened to overlap with mine for those brief moments. I still take that road home most nights. My co-workers think I'm crazy. They all avoid that stretch after dark because the curve is dangerous. They don't know the real reason I slow down to a crawl there. They don't know I'm looking for yellow eyes in the darkness. Sometimes I catch myself watching the cornfields during the day when I drive past. The farmers harvested most of it by late October, leaving the fields open and empty. Where does it go when there's no corn to hide in? The woods, I guess. But those woods aren't that extensive. You'd think someone would have spotted it during hunting season. I haven't told many people about this. My brother thinks I was hallucinating from exhaustion. My best friend suggested I was half asleep at the wheel and dreamed the whole thing. Maybe they're right. Maybe my tired brain conjured up a monster out of shadows and moonlight. But those eyes, the way they looked at me, the intelligence behind them, and that scream, it echoes in my dreams sometimes, yanking me awake in a cold sweat. I don't know what I saw out there on that back road in Frankton. I don't know if I'll ever see it again. Part of me hopes I do, just to prove to myself that I'm not crazy. Part of me hopes I don't, because what if next time it doesn't just watch from a distance? All I know is that every night when I round that curve, I hold my breath. My hand hovers over the throttle, ready to gun it if necessary, and my eyes scan the edge of the field, looking for something tall standing where it shouldn't be, because whatever it was real, and it was watching me. Story 4. I still have trouble sleeping at night. It's been 12 years, and I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched whenever I'm outdoors. My therapist says it's PTSD, but she doesn't believe what really happened to us that night in September 2011. I wouldn't believe it either if I hadn't lived through it. It was supposed to be a fun 3-day backpacking trip through Umpqua National Forest with my 3 best friends, Mark, Jen, and Dave. We'd been planning it for months. Mark and I had been hiking buddies since college, and we'd brought our partners along for what should have been a gorgeous Pacific Northwest adventure. We were all experienced hikers, not experts by any means, but we knew what we were doing. We'd completed the same loop the year before without incident. The first day went perfectly. The weather was ideal, not too hot, not too cold. We spotted deer, a few eagles, and even caught a glimpse of what might have been a black bear in the distance. Nothing unusual. We covered about 8 miles before setting up our first camp near a small lake. We had dinner, shared a few beers, and turned in early to rest up for day 2. That second day is when everything changed. We hiked another 7 miles through increasingly dense forest. The trail was getting more remote, exactly what we wanted. That feeling of being away from civilization, truly in nature. By late afternoon, we found a perfect flat ridge to make camp. It had a natural clearing with enough space for our 2 tents, and we could see down into the valley. It was beautiful. As the sun started to set, we got a campfire going and started prepping dinner. That's when Jen first mentioned how quiet it had gotten. "Guys, listen, where are all the birds?" She was right. I hadn't noticed until she pointed it out. But the forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no insects, nothing. Just our voices and the crackling of the fire. A heavy fog was starting to roll in along the forest floor, making the trees around us look like they were floating. It was eerie, but I remember trying to rationalize it. "Probably just the weather changing," I said, but I didn't believe it myself. We finished eating around 8 o'clock, and the silence was really getting to us. We talked louder than necessary, just to fill the void. The fog had gotten thicker, and visibility beyond 20 yards was practically zero. Mark suggested we turn in early, but none of us were tired yet, so we stayed by the fire, passing a flask of whiskey around. That's when we heard it, a deep, steady breathing sound coming from the tree line to our right. At first, I thought it was the wind, but there was no wind that night. The air was completely still. "Did you guys hear that?" Dave whispered. Before anyone could answer, we heard it again, this time from our left side. 2 separate breathing sounds, heavy and deliberate, like something massive trying to control its breath. My skin instantly broke out in goosebumps. Mark grabbed a flashlight and pointed it toward the sound, but the beam just disappeared into the fog. "Hello?" he called out. "Is someone there?" No response, just more breathing now from 3 different directions. We were being surrounded. Then came the footsteps. Heavy, deliberate. The ground actually vibrated slightly with each one. Whatever was making them was big, way bigger than a person, and they were circling us, staying just at the edge of the tree line where the fog was thickest. "Bear," Jen whispered, clutching Dave's arm. "Bears don't move like that," he replied, his voice shaking. "They don't coordinate." He was right. These footsteps were strategic. They'd stop, then start again from a different position. Sometimes we'd hear twigs snap, but mostly they moved with surprising stealth for something so heavy. The breathing continued, sometimes punctuated by what sounded like low huffs. Mark grabbed his headlamp and put it on, scanning the tree line. That's when I saw it. Just for a second, as the beam passed through the fog, a dark shape, impossibly tall and wide, moving between 2 trees about 30 yards away. It wasn't a bear. Bears don't stand like that. "Did you see that?" I hissed. Before Mark could answer, Jen screamed and pointed in the opposite direction. Another shape, similar to the first, but even larger, shifted behind a thick pine. The movement was fluid, almost human-like, but the proportions were all wrong. Its shoulders must have been 4 feet wide. We huddled closer to the fire, back to back, scanning the darkness. I counted at least 3 separate figures moving around us. Maybe 4. They were keeping their distance, but definitely closing in, tightening their circle. Then one of them made a sound I'll never forget as long as I live. It started as a low hum, almost like someone humming deep in their chest. but it grew into something else. A roar that seemed to reverberate through my entire body. It wasn't like any animal I'd ever heard. There was intelligence behind it, purpose. It ended with a sound like someone punching a tree. Wham! Followed by the unmistakable crack of splintering bark. "We need to leave now," Mark said, his voice eerily calm despite the terror in his eyes. "Are you crazy? It's pitch black out there," Jen whispered. "They're going to come into camp if we stay," he replied. "I'd rather be moving than sitting here waiting." We didn't argue. We quickly grabbed our packs, not bothering to break down the tents. Just our essentials: water, some food, headlamps, and my hunting knife. Mark had remembered that we'd crossed a stream bed about a quarter-mile downhill from our camp earlier that day. If we could reach it, we'd have open space around us, maybe even a chance to follow it to the main trail. We moved slowly at first, trying not to provoke whatever was watching us, but as soon as we stepped beyond the firelight, the footsteps changed. They became more frequent, more aggressive. They were following us. The fog made navigation nearly impossible. We stumbled downhill, using Mark's GPS to guide us toward the stream bed. The whole time, those heavy footsteps kept pace, sometimes ahead of us, sometimes behind, always just out of clear sight. I kept my headlamp on, scanning constantly, but only caught glimpses. A massive arm here, a broad back there, always disappearing before I could focus. We'd gone maybe 200 yards when Dave suddenly stopped dead in his tracks. We all crashed into him. "What the hell, man?" I started to say, but then I saw it too. We'd reached a small clearing, and there, directly in front of us, stood the largest of the creatures. It was at least 8 feet tall, maybe taller, with shoulders so broad it seemed to fill the space between 2 massive trees. Its arms hung long at its sides, reaching almost to its knees, and its eyes... Oh God! Its eyes caught the beam of our flashlights and reflected back with a faint reddish glow, like a nocturnal animal, but somehow worse. It was covered in dark hair, matted in places, and its face, I still have trouble describing its face. Not quite human, not quite ape, but somehow both. Intelligent, ancient, and unmistakably angry. We stood frozen, nobody daring to move. For what felt like minutes but was probably only seconds, we just stared at each other. Then it filled its chest with air and let out a scream that hit me like a physical force. It wasn't just loud, it was primal, a sound that triggered something deep in my DNA that said, "Run." At that exact moment, another one of the creatures came crashing through the underbrush behind us. We scattered, pure instinct taking over. I remember grabbing Jen's hand and just running, branches whipping at my face, roots trying to trip me. Somehow we all managed to stay together, half running, half falling downhill until we splashed into the stream bed. The water was freezing, but we didn't care. We huddled together in the middle of that stream, the water up to our knees, scanning the banks with our lights. They were still there. Dark shapes moving along both sides of the stream, pacing back and forth, but for some reason they wouldn't enter the water. We stayed there all night. No one spoke, no one slept. We just stood in that freezing water, watching the shapes move around us, listening to their breathing and occasional calls to each other. Grunts, and those humming sounds that seemed to be some kind of communication. As the first light of dawn broke through the trees, they gradually retreated. The last one I saw was the big one from the clearing. It stood watching us from the tree line for a long time before finally turning and walking away with that same fluid, rolling gait. When we were sure they were gone, we made our way back up to our campsite to get our tents and the rest of our gear. What we found made my blood run cold all over again. The entire site was destroyed. The fire had been scattered, one tent was completely knocked down, and the other was torn. But it wasn't random destruction, it was methodical. Large branches had been snapped in half, branches that would have taken tremendous strength to break. And there were footprints everywhere, massive, wide prints spaced far apart, some showing clear toe impressions. They were all around where we had been sitting, some just feet from where we'd been huddled by the fire. We grabbed what was salvageable and got the hell out of there, hiking non-stop until we reached the trailhead. We didn't talk much on the way out. What was there to say? We all knew what we'd seen, what had happened. It's been 12 years, and I've never gone back to the Umpqua. None of us have. Dave and Jen broke up a few months later. The experience was too much for their relationship. Mark moved to Chicago, about as far from the Pacific Northwest forests as he could get. We don't talk about that night when we do catch up. I've done research since then, read accounts, joined forums. I know now that what we encountered wasn't just one Sasquatch. It was a group of them, working together, the way they surrounded us, the way they communicated, the way they drove us toward the stream. It was coordinated, intelligent, territorial. Sometimes I still wake up hearing that breathing sound, feeling like something huge is standing just outside my bedroom window. I keep the curtains closed now, always. Story 5. I've debated for months whether to share this. Honestly, I'm still trying to make sense of what happened that day, and part of me worries people will just think I'm crazy or making this up for attention. But I need to put this out there, if only to see if anyone else has experienced something similar in the Malala River area. This happened last October, about 13 miles south of the Glen Avon Bridge in Oregon. My buddy Jake and I had been camping in that spot for years. It's secluded, peaceful, and we'd always had good experiences there. We were just making a day trip to check on our regular site before a planned weekend camping trip. We brought my 2 Rottweilers, Brutus and Rex, who always come with us on these outings. The day started normally enough. It was around 11 in the morning when we pulled up to our usual parking spot. The weather was decent for October in Oregon, overcast but not raining, around 55 degrees. The forest was damp from recent rainfall, and that earthy moss and pine smell hung heavy in the air. We were planning to just make sure the site was clear, maybe gather some dry wood under the tarps we'd left, and head back home. I remember stepping out of my truck and immediately feeling something was off. I've spent enough time in forests to develop a kind of sixth sense. You know how sometimes the woods just feel wrong? That's exactly what I felt. The birds were unusually quiet, not silent but subdued, like they were all whispering to each other. Jake didn't seem to notice anything unusual, but both dogs were on alert right away, which struck me as odd. They weren't barking or growling, just extremely vigilant, ears perked up, scanning the tree line. We'd been out of the truck maybe 2 minutes, just grabbing our day packs, when it happened. We were standing maybe 25 feet from where we'd parked when this absolutely massive crashing sound erupted from our left side. It's hard to describe how violent and sudden it was, like something enormous was tearing through the underbrush with incredible force. The sound was so unexpected and powerful that Jake and I both froze completely. The weird part was that I couldn't actually see what was causing it. The brush was dense in that area, lots of ferns, salal bushes and young saplings creating a thick screen. But I could clearly see the vegetation parting and thrashing, maybe 10 feet off the path. Whatever was moving through there was big, way bigger than a deer or even a regular black bear. What really got to me, though, wasn't what I saw, but what I felt. Each footfall, and I'm certain they were footfalls, sent a vibration through the ground that I could physically feel through my hiking boots. It wasn't subtle either. It was like when a large truck drives past your house and you feel that low rumble. Except this was in the middle of the forest, and each impact was distinct. I counted 2, maybe 3 strides, and they were spaced far apart, much farther than a person could step. The second footfall was the most pronounced. It landed with this dull thud that literally made the soles of my feet tingle. I looked at Jake, and his wide eyes told me he felt it too. The dog's reaction was what really threw me. Brutus and Rex are trained guard dogs. They've encountered bears and coyotes on our trips before and always go ballistic, barking, growling, even straining at their leashes to chase after them, but this time, nothing. No barking, no growling. They both stood rigid, staring in the direction of the disturbance, but pressed against our legs instead of charging forward. Rex was actually trembling slightly, and I'd never seen him afraid of anything before. The whole incident lasted maybe 15 seconds. Whatever it was crashed through about 30 yards of underbrush, and then the forest went completely silent again. No more footfalls, no more vegetation movement, nothing. "What the hell was that?" Jake whispered, still frozen in place. I shook my head. "I don't know, but it was big." We debated whether to investigate or leave. Part of me wanted to see if we could find tracks or broken branches, some evidence of what had just passed by. But the dog's behavior made me hesitate. Animals have instincts humans don't, and if my 90-pound Rottweilers were scared, that was good enough reason for me to be cautious. We compromised by continuing to the campsite, but staying hyper-aware of our surroundings. The campsite itself was about 100 yards from where we'd had the encounter. Everything looked normal there. Our old fire pit was untouched. The tarps we'd left for wood collection were still in place. But it didn't feel normal. The entire time we were there, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. This wasn't paranoia or general unease. It was a physical sensation, like I could literally feel eyes boring into me from the tree line. I've been hunting since I was 12, and I know what it feels like when you're being observed. This was that, but magnified tenfold. Jake felt it too. We kept finding ourselves scanning the forest edge, speaking in hushed tones without even realizing we were doing it. The dogs stayed unusually close, still alert and watchful. We hurried through our tasks, neither of us willing to admit we were spooked, but both clearly eager to leave. As we were packing up to go, I decided to tell Jake something I'd never shared before. "This isn't the first weird thing I've experienced here," I said. "What do you mean?" I explained that over the years, I'd had numerous strange experiences at this campsite. When camping overnight, I'd frequently heard heavy bipedal footsteps just beyond our firelight, usually between midnight and 3 in the morning. They always sounded like a person walking left, right, but the stride was too slow, too measured, and the weight behind each step was substantial, making twigs snap loudly and occasionally causing that same ground vibration I'd felt earlier. I told him about the persistent feeling of being watched that I'd experienced nearly every time I camped there, even in broad daylight, how sometimes I'd wake up at night with my skin crawling, absolutely certain something was standing just outside my tent, watching me. "Why the hell didn't you ever mention this before?" Jake asked, looking slightly betrayed. "Because it sounds crazy," I replied, "and because nothing bad ever happened. I figured it was just my imagination or maybe a curious bear." But there were other things too. The whooping sounds I'd heard on multiple occasions, distant calls with a distinctive pattern of rising and falling notes that didn't match any known animal in the area, and the rock tapping, deliberate, rhythmic tapping from just inside the tree line that I'd heard on at least 3 separate camping trips. Jake listened without interrupting, his expression growing more concerned. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "We should probably head back," he finally said. I agreed. The walk back to the truck was tense. Every snapping twig or rustling leaf made us jump. The dogs stayed right between us, still unusually subdued. When we reached the area where we'd heard the crashing earlier, we both instinctively picked up our pace. I was about to feel relief as we approached the truck when something stopped me in my tracks. There, crossing our path about 30 yards ahead, was a massive, dark shape. It moved from right to left with incredible speed, especially considering its size. It was only visible for maybe 2 seconds before disappearing into the dense forest on the other side of the path. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. It was bipedal, at least 7 feet tall, and covered in what looked like dark hair or fur. The movement was fluid and purposeful, not a bear's awkward gait when standing on hind legs, but something that was naturally walking upright. The stride length was enormous, covering ground with shocking efficiency. Jake saw it too. I know because he grabbed my arm so hard it left bruises. The dogs went completely still, not making a sound. "Tell me that wasn't what I think it was," Jake whispered. I couldn't answer. My mouth had gone completely dry. We practically ran the rest of the way to the truck, the dogs keeping pace with us. I fumbled with the keys, hands shaking so badly I dropped them twice before managing to unlock the doors. We piled in, dogs in the back seat, and I locked the doors immediately. As I started the engine, I glanced in my rearview mirror. For a split second, I thought I saw movement at the forest edge. Something large shifting position behind a tree, but when I looked directly, there was nothing there. The drive home was almost completely silent. What do you say after something like that? We tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a bear, maybe it was a person in dark clothing, maybe our eyes were playing tricks on us. But we both knew those explanations didn't fit what we'd seen. It's been months now, and I still haven't been back to that campsite. Jake refuses to return. The dogs get agitated whenever I even load camping gear into my truck, as if they're worried about where we might be going. I've researched local wildlife extensively since then, trying to find a logical explanation. Nothing fits. Black bears don't move like that. Elk don't walk on two legs. No human could make the ground vibrate with their footsteps or cover ground with that stride length. I've lived in Oregon my whole life and spent countless hours in those forests. I'm not someone who jumps at shadows or buys into local legends. But what happened that day in the Molalla River area has fundamentally changed how I view the forests I grew up in. I don't know what's out there, but I know what I felt, what I heard, and what I saw. Something unexplainable inhabits those woods, something that watches, waits, and sometimes, if you're unlucky enough, reveals itself just enough to make you question everything you thought you knew about what's possible. Story 6. I've never told this story to many people because honestly, who would believe me? But it's been eating at me for years, and I need to get it off my chest. Maybe someone here has experienced something similar and can help me make sense of it all. This happened back when I was 14, about 12 years ago now. My grandfather owned this massive ranch in East Texas, something like 4,600 acres of woods, creeks, and pastures. It was my favorite place in the world. I'd been hunting and exploring those woods since I was 10, and I knew that land like the back of my hand, or at least I thought I did. That morning started like any other hunting day. I woke up early, grabbed my rifle, a Remington 243 my grandfather had given me for my 13th birthday, and headed out to the high pasture. The high pasture was this beautiful clearing surrounded by pine trees where deer would often come out to graze in the mornings. I spent a few hours there but didn't see anything worth shooting, so I headed back to the house around 11 for lunch. When I got back, I could tell something was wrong. My grandfather was sitting at the kitchen table looking worried, which wasn't like him at all. He was this tough old cowboy type who never seemed bothered by anything. He told me his dog Bob was missing. Bob was this old blue heeler that followed my grandfather everywhere. That dog never wandered off, ever. He went out last night to do his business and never came back, my grandfather said, staring into his coffee cup. I've been calling for him all morning. I offered to help look for Bob, but my grandfather just shook his head. Better stick to hunting. Maybe check the high pasture again this afternoon. I remember thinking it was weird how he specifically wanted me to go back to the high pasture, since it wasn't the best spot for afternoon hunting, but I had my own favorite spot, this tree stand between two creeks in the bottomland. It was about a mile from the house, in what we called the bottoms, because it was in this little valley between two ridges. After lunch, I grabbed my gear and headed out. I didn't tell my grandfather I was going to my tree stand instead of the high pasture. I just wanted to be in my favorite spot. It was this homemade wooden platform about 15 feet up in an old oak tree, with perfect views of a small clearing and a game trail. I climbed up around 2 in the afternoon and settled in. The weather was perfect, cool but not cold, with just a light breeze. For about an hour, everything was completely normal. I was just sitting there, scanning the woods with my binoculars occasionally, mostly just enjoying being outside. Then I noticed this doe about 60 yards out. She was acting strange, all alert and twitchy. She kept looking back toward this thick brush area, whistling and stomping her front hoof. If you've never heard a deer whistle, it's this weird, high-pitched sound they make when they're alarmed. Something was spooking her bad. I raised my rifle and looked through the scope to get a better view of what might be bothering her. At first, I thought I was seeing a black cow that had wandered into the bottoms from the neighboring property, but we didn't have any neighbors with black cattle. And as I adjusted my focus, I realized it wasn't a cow at all. My next thought was, maybe it was a huge feral hog. We had problems with those on the ranch, but then I saw something that turned my blood to ice. From the shadows of the thicket, I saw what looked like a hand, a massive hand with long fingers and black nails, reach up and place itself against a fallen oak log. The fingers were too long to be human, and the hand was covered in dark, matted hair. I froze completely. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Whatever this thing was, it was only about 40 or 50 yards away from my tree stand. I couldn't see its body clearly because of all the brush, but I could make out a dark shape that was way too big to be anything that should have been in those woods. I remember thinking, this isn't real. I'm seeing things. But I wasn't. The doe bolted suddenly, crashing through the underbrush, and the thing moved slightly. Through the gaps in the foliage, I caught glimpses of something massive shifting its weight. The hand disappeared, and for a split second, I saw what looked like eyes reflecting back the afternoon sun, too high off the ground to be any normal animal. I've never been so terrified in my life. My whole body was shaking so bad I thought I might fall out of the tree stand. I didn't know what to do. Should I shoot? Should I yell? Should I just sit perfectly still and hope it didn't notice me? I decided to get the hell out of there. As quietly as I could, I lowered my rifle down to the ground, using the rope I always brought with me. Then I climbed down, trying not to make the wooden platform creak. My hands were so sweaty I nearly slipped twice. When my feet hit the ground, I grabbed my rifle and started walking away as fast as I could without running. I didn't take my usual path home, which would have led me closer to where I'd seen the thing. Instead, I took this roundabout way that added almost half a mile but kept me in more open ground. Once I hit the open pasture, I just ran, full on, sprinted across that field like my life depended on it. I kept looking back over my shoulder, convinced that whatever I'd seen was following me. By the time I reached the house, I was completely out of breath, sweating like crazy even though it was cool out. I burst through the back door, and my grandmother nearly jumped out of her skin. "Lord have mercy, what's got into you?" she asked. "I saw something in the woods," I gasped. Like a gorilla or something. My grandmother looked concerned and put her hand on my forehead like she was checking for a fever, but what really stuck with me was my grandfather's reaction. He was sitting in his recliner, and when I said that, he didn't laugh or tell me I was being ridiculous. He just got very quiet and stared at me. "Where?" he finally asked. "At my tree stand, in the bottoms between the creeks." He nodded slowly, then got up and walked to the gun cabinet. He took out his Remington 870 shotgun, the one with the extended magazine that held 8 rounds, and started loading it with slugs. Not birdshot, not buckshot, slugs. "Your grandmother's making pot roast for dinner," he said, like we hadn't just been talking about me seeing some impossible creature in his woods. "Why don't you go get cleaned up?" That night was weird. My grandparents didn't ask me any more questions about what I'd seen. Dinner was mostly silent. After we ate, I noticed my grandfather had closed all the drapes in the house, something they never did. He kept his shotgun leaning against his recliner and a big maglite flashlight on the side table. I went to bed around 10, but I couldn't sleep. My room had a window that faced the back of the property, toward the bottoms. I kept staring out into the darkness, imagining that thing from the woods standing at the edge of the yard, watching the house. Around midnight, I heard the back door open and close quietly. I peeked out my window and saw the beam of my grandfather's flashlight sweeping across the yard as he walked around the house. When I woke up the next morning and went to the kitchen, my grandfather was sitting at the table drinking coffee. He looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes. The shotgun was still beside him. "Did you sleep at all?" I asked him. "Kept watch from the porch most of the night," he said. Then he looked me right in the eyes. "What exactly did you see yesterday?" I told him everything, the doe acting strange, the hand with the long fingers and black nails, the shape in the shadows. He listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "I think Bob might have run off to the Johnson place. I'll drive over there later and check." Then he added, "Maybe stick to the high pasture from now on when you're hunting alone." We never found Bob. My grandfather never directly acknowledged what I might have seen in those woods. But I noticed he started going out hunting with me more often after that, and he always brought that shotgun loaded with slugs. I kept hunting on the ranch for years, but I never went back to that tree stand alone. A few times my grandfather and I went to the bottoms together, but we never saw anything unusual. Still, he always seemed tense there, always scanning the thickets and shadows. Years later, when I was in college, I tried bringing it up again. "Grandpa, remember when I thought I saw something in the woods that time?" I asked. He just nodded and said, "Some things in this world are better left alone." He passed away 3 years ago, and I inherited a portion of that ranch. I still hunt there sometimes, but I've never gone back to that spot between the creeks. And to this day, if I'm anywhere near the bottoms, I carry a shotgun loaded with slugs, just like my grandfather did. I don't know what I saw that day. Maybe it was a bear, though we'd never had bears in that area. Maybe it was just shadows playing tricks on my teenage mind. But sometimes, when I'm alone in those woods and the wind dies down, I swear I can feel something watching me from the shadows. And I remember those long fingers with the black nails, and I wonder what my grandfather knew that he never told me. Story 7. I've struggled with telling people about what happened to us last April. My husband Brian thinks I should just let it go, but I can't. What my son and I saw that morning was real, and I can't get the image out of my head even now, over a year later. It was April 4th, 2014, a Friday. I remember because it was the last day before spring break, and my 8-year-old son Ethan was excited about our planned trip to visit my parents in Tallahassee the following week. We were running late that morning because Ethan couldn't find his science project, a diorama of the Everglades ecosystem he'd worked on all week. After 15 frantic minutes of searching, we found it behind the couch. How it got there, I still have no idea. We live about 20 minutes outside of Gainesville, Florida, in a little development called Cypress Creek. It's nice enough, affordable homes, decent schools, and surrounded by that typical Florida wilderness that's not quite forest, not quite swamp, but somehow both. To get to Ethan's elementary school, I usually take this back road called Deacon Road. It's a shortcut that saves about 10 minutes compared to going through town, but it's narrow and winding, with no shoulder, just road and then immediate swamp on both sides. The Spanish moss hangs from the cypress trees like old curtains, and in some places the canopy is so thick that you need headlights even at midday. That morning was foggy, not unusual for spring in Florida, but it was thicker than normal, the kind of fog that seems to swallow sound. I had the radio on low, some morning show with people laughing too loudly about nothing important. Ethan was in the back seat, still half asleep, clutching his diorama. It was around 7:30, and the fog was just starting to lift as the sun rose higher. We were about halfway down Deacon Road, at that stretch where it curves around what locals call the deep end, a section of swamp that's supposedly over 30 feet deep in places. I was driving carefully because visibility was still poor, maybe 40 feet ahead at most. I remember checking my rearview mirror to see if Ethan was fully awake yet when I turned back and saw it. Something stepped out from the right side of the road, from between two massive cypress trees. At first, my brain tried to make sense of it. Was it a bear standing on its hind legs? A very tall man in some kind of costume? But no, it wasn't either of those things. I slammed on the brakes so hard that Ethan's diorama flew forward and hit the back of my seat. The seatbelt locked, and I felt the burn across my chest. The car skidded slightly on the damp road before coming to a complete stop, and there it was, standing completely still, directly in front of our car, maybe 15 feet away. "Mom?" Ethan's voice came from the back seat, small and confused. "What is that?" I couldn't answer him. I couldn't speak at all. My hands were frozen on the steering wheel, knuckles white. The thing, the creature, stood at least 7 feet tall, maybe 8. Its proportions were all wrong for a human. The shoulders were too broad, the arms too long, hanging down almost to its knees. It was covered in dark, matted hair, not black, but a deep brown like wet soil. The hair was thickest on its shoulders and back, thinner on its chest and face. Its face, God, its face, that's what keeps me up at night still. It wasn't animal-like exactly, but it wasn't fully human either. The forehead sloped back dramatically, with heavy brow ridges shadowing its eyes. The nose was flat and wide, but the nostrils flared slightly as it seemed to be smelling us. The mouth was surprisingly small, almost delicate compared to the rest of its features, set in a face that reminded me of those reconstructions you see of early humans in natural history museums. The eyes were what really shook me. They were deep-set under those heavy brows, but unmistakably intelligent. Dark. I couldn't tell the exact color through the windshield and the lingering fog, but alert, aware, looking right at us. "Mom," Ethan whispered again, louder this time. "Is that Bigfoot?" The creature tilted its head slightly at the sound of Ethan's voice, like a dog hearing a strange noise. That small, human-like gesture made my skin crawl. Then I noticed something else, something that made this whole encounter even more disturbing. Around its waist, the creature wore what looked like some kind of crude covering. Not clothes exactly, but definitely something intentionally placed there. It looked like animal skin, maybe deer or something similar, wrapped around and secured somehow. Not neatly done like you'd imagine clothes, but purposeful, deliberate. This thing, whatever it was, wasn't just some animal. It was using tools, creating coverings. We sat there, the three of us, me, Ethan, and this impossible being, in complete silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only a minute or two. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Was I hallucinating? Had I fallen asleep at the wheel? But Ethan could see it too. The creature's chest rose and fell slowly with each breath. I could see wisps of steam coming from its nostrils in the cool morning air. This was no hallucination. This was real. I had left my phone in my purse on the passenger seat. Should I try to take a picture? Would it attack if I moved? My maternal instincts were screaming at me to protect Ethan, but I had no idea what to do. Run, stay still, try to drive around it? Before I could decide, the creature suddenly shifted its weight. I flinched, my foot hovering over the gas pedal, ready to floor it if necessary, but it didn't approach us. Instead, it turned slightly to look back at the swamp it had emerged from, then back at us. There was no aggression in its movements, just a sort of deliberate awareness. Then, as calmly as it had appeared, it turned completely away from us and walked across the road toward the swamp on the left side. Its gait was smooth but strange, longer strides than a human would take, with a slight roll to its shoulders. It moved with the confidence of something that knew exactly what it was and where it belonged. At the edge of the road, it paused and looked back at us one more time. In that moment, I swear I felt something pass between us. Not communication exactly, but acknowledgement. This wasn't a random animal crossing a road. This was an encounter between two thinking species. Then it ducked slightly to pass under a low-hanging cypress branch and disappeared into the swamp. I don't know how long we sat there, engine idling, before Ethan broke the silence. "Did you see it was wearing something, Mom? Like clothes?" His voice snapped me back to reality. I was shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. "Yes," I managed to say. "I saw that." "What was it?" "I don't know, honey." My voice sounded strange, distant, like someone else was speaking through me. "I really don't know." I put the car in drive and slowly continued down the road. My mind was reeling. Should I call someone? The police? A wildlife officer? Who would believe me? I dropped Ethan off at school, telling him we'd talk more about what we saw later. He seemed more excited than scared, already planning to tell his friends. I made him promise not to say anything until we talked to Dad. The last thing I needed was my son becoming known as the kid with the crazy Bigfoot-seeing mum. When I got home, Brian was still there, running late for work. I broke down as soon as I walked in the door. The words came pouring out of me. The creature, its size, the intelligence in its eyes, the animal skin covering. Brian listened patiently, but I could see the concern in his eyes. Not belief, concern. He asked if I'd been sleeping well, if I'd been taking my allergy medication that sometimes made me drowsy. He suggested maybe it was a bear, or possibly even a homeless person living in the swamp. "Bears don't wear animal skins as clothes, Brian," I snapped. "And it wasn't human, not fully." "Lisa," he said gently, "do you hear yourself? You're talking about Bigfoot in Gainesville, Florida." "I know what I saw," I insisted. "And Ethan saw it too." "He's 8, honey. Kids see what they expect to see." That made me angry. He didn't say anything about what it was until after we sat there staring at it for 2 minutes. He wasn't making it up, and neither am I. Brian sighed and gave me a hug. "Look, I believe that you believe you saw something, but there has to be a logical explanation." I pulled away from him. "Go to work. We'll talk about this later." After he left, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and started researching. I found out there have been dozens of Bigfoot sightings in Florida over the years, though most were in the more remote parts of the Panhandle or deep in the Everglades. Nothing official around Gainesville. But on some forum boards, there were a few local stories. Hunters claiming to have seen something large moving through the swamps at dawn, hikers finding strange footprints too big to be human. I called in sick to work and drove back to Deacon Road mid-morning. The fog had lifted completely by then, and the road looked ordinary, peaceful even. I parked at the spot where we'd had our encounter and got out of the car. The ground was too hard for footprints on the road itself, but I walked to where the creature had entered the swamp. The vegetation was disturbed there. Some branches broken about 7 feet up, consistent with something tall pushing through. I didn't dare go further into the swamp itself. Florida swamps are dangerous, even without mysterious creatures. Alligators, water moccasins, and the risk of simply sinking into unseen mud holes kept me on the roadside. I took some pictures of the broken branches with my phone, though they proved nothing. They could have been broken by anything. That night, after Ethan was in bed, Brian and I had a long talk. He was more willing to listen after having some time to think about it, but I could tell he still didn't believe me. He suggested we keep this between ourselves for now. "People will think you're crazy, Lisa," he said. "Is that what you want? For our neighbors to start avoiding us? For Ethan's teachers to look at him differently?" He had a point. So I agreed not to tell anyone else, at least for a while. But it's been over a year now, and I can't stop thinking about what we saw. I've driven down Deacon Road hundreds of times since then, always scanning the tree line, always hoping for another glimpse. Nothing. Ethan still talks about it sometimes. He's drawn pictures of our Bigfoot, as he calls it. In his drawings, the creature always has that animal skin around its waist and those intelligent eyes. I don't know what we encountered that foggy April morning. A surviving member of some prehistoric human species, an unknown primate, something else entirely. All I know is that it was real, it was intelligent, and it chose to reveal itself to us for reasons I'll never understand. Sometimes when I'm alone in the house and it's quiet, I find myself thinking about those eyes looking back at me, recognizing me, and I wonder if somewhere in the swamps around Gainesville, it's thinking about me too. Story 8. I've been debating whether to post this for years. I've only told a few close friends and my brother, and most of them think I'm either crazy or was just seeing things because of buck fever or whatever. But I know what I saw that day in the woods near Eli. I know it was real, and it still messes with me, almost 20 years later. This happened back in September of 2004. I was 32 then, had been bow hunting since I was a teenager, so I wasn't some rookie who didn't know the woods. I'd taken that weekend off work, third weekend of bow season, and headed up to some public land north of Eli, Minnesota. It's pretty remote up there, lots of thick forest, good deer population. I'd scouted the area earlier that summer and found a perfect spot where several game trails converged near a thick patch of brush that provided good bedding cover. I got to my spot around 1 in the afternoon, plenty of time to set up and let the woods settle before prime evening movement. The weather was perfect, mid-50s, light breeze, partly cloudy. I climbed up into my tree stand about 20 feet up a sturdy oak, got settled in, pulled up my bow, and just waited. For the first few hours, everything was totally normal. Saw a couple of squirrels, some chickadees, even a piloted woodpecker hammering away at a dead tree about 30 yards off. Around 6:30, just when the light was starting to get that golden quality it gets before sunset, I noticed something weird. The forest went completely silent, and I mean completely. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. At first I thought maybe a coyote or bobcat was moving through, which sometimes happens. But this silence felt different. Heavier somehow. The hair on my arms stood up, and I remember distinctly thinking, something's not right here. That's when I started hearing it. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps, coming from the thickest part of the brush about 80 yards away, but they weren't like deer steps, which are quick and light. These were slow, methodical. Step, pause, step, pause. And whatever was making them was big. I could hear branches breaking, not just twigs snapping, but actual limbs. And the weird thing was, it wasn't following any game trail. It was just pushing straight through the thickest stuff. My first thought was bear. We have black bears up there, and sometimes they'll crash through brush like that. But something felt off about it. Bears usually make more noise overall. They'll huff and snort, and you can hear them digging or investigating things. This was just those heavy, purposeful steps. The footsteps got closer, maybe 60 yards away now, and then they stopped. Dead silence again. I was barely breathing at this point, my bow in my hand, but I wasn't even thinking about deer anymore. I was straining my eyes to see through the brush, trying to spot whatever was out there. Then it happened. The brush parted, and this thing stepped into a small clearing. I'm 6'1", 200 pounds, and this creature made me feel tiny. It had to be at least 8 feet tall, maybe taller. It was covered in dark brown hair, not fur, but hair, long and matted in places, especially around the shoulders. Its chest was massive, like twice as wide as mine, and its arms hung down past its knees. The legs were thick and powerful looking. But the face, God, the face is what I still see in my nightmares. It had less hair there, and the skin underneath was a greyish colour. The eyes were deep set under a prominent brow ridge, dark and intelligent looking. The nose was wide and flat, and its jaw was heavy. I was completely frozen, couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't even think clearly. The thing was just standing there, scanning the forest. Then it turned its head, and I swear to God, it looked right at me in my tree stand. Our eyes met, and I felt this cold wave wash over me. It wasn't like making eye contact with a deer or even a bear. There was something behind those eyes, something that knew exactly what I was. That's when it made the sound. This deep, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate through the entire forest. It wasn't like any animal sound I've ever heard. Not a bear, not a cougar, nothing. It was deeper, more purposeful, I guess. Like it was trying to communicate something specific. Then it crouched down, grabbed a piece of dead wood, a chunk of branch about the size of my forearm, and just hurled it in my general direction. The branch crashed through the trees about 20 yards to my right. It wasn't like it was actively trying to hit me, more like a warning. After that, it didn't leave. That's the part that really got to me. It started pacing around the area, always keeping within about 50 to 70 yards of my tree. Sometimes it would disappear into the thick brush, and I'd lose sight of it for 5 or 10 minutes. But then, I'd hear those footsteps again from a slightly different direction. It was circling me. I kept checking my watch. 6:45, 7:15, 7:45. The sun was going down, and I was getting more and more terrified about what would happen when it got dark. Would this thing come for me? Would I have to try to climb down and make a run for it? My truck was about 3/4 of a mile away, and the thought of trying to navigate that distance in the dark with this creature out there was paralyzing. At one point, around 8 o'clock, when it was getting pretty dim, the thing let out another one of those growls, and then I heard what sounded like a tree being struck. Hard, like it had punched or slammed into a trunk. The sound echoed through the forest, and I nearly fell out of my stand. I decided I couldn't wait until complete darkness. At about 8:30, with just enough light left to see the trail, I very slowly started gathering my gear. I lowered my backpack down on my haul line as quietly as possible, then my bow. The whole time, I was listening for those footsteps, trying to figure out where the creature was. I hadn't heard it for maybe 15 minutes, but that didn't mean it was gone. Climbing down that ladder was the hardest thing I've ever done. Each step, I was waiting for those footsteps to come charging through the brush. When my boots finally hit the ground, I almost threw up from the adrenaline dump. I grabbed my gear, slung my bow over my shoulder, and started walking. Not running, because I was afraid that would trigger some kind of chase instinct, toward my truck. The entire walk back, I felt like I was being watched. I kept hearing subtle movements in the forest around me, not the clear footsteps from before, but just enough noise to let me know something was keeping pace with me through the trees. About halfway back to my truck, I heard a branch snap maybe 30 yards off the trail, and I picked up my pace a bit. When I finally saw my truck, I broke into a run. I threw my gear in the back, fumbled with my keys, and got inside, locking the doors immediately. As I started the engine and flipped on the headlights, I swear I saw movement at the edge of the forest, just a dark shape melting back into the trees. I drove home in a daze, white-knuckling the steering wheel the whole way. Didn't even stop for gas, even though I was running low. Just needed to get away from there. That was 19 years ago, and I've never gone back to that specific area. I've bow hunted other places, but never alone anymore, and never in areas that remote. I've researched what I saw over the years, read about Bigfoot sightings, watched documentaries, even reluctantly joined some online forums where people share similar experiences. Some of the descriptions match what I saw so perfectly that it gives me chills. I've thought about reporting it officially, But what would I say? Who would believe me? The few people I've told either think I'm exaggerating or that it was just a bear standing on its hind legs. But I know what bears look like. This wasn't a bear. The thing that still bothers me the most is the intelligence I sensed. It wasn't just an animal reacting on instinct. The way it paced me, the thrown branch, the territorial display, it was sending a message. It was letting me know I was in its territory, and it was tolerating my presence, but just barely. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, feeling like those eyes are watching me through my bedroom window. I know that's just my mind playing tricks, but the memory of that encounter is burned into me. I understand now why some areas of forest remain wild. They belong to something else, something that was there long before us and will probably be there long after we're gone. I don't expect everyone to believe this story. Hell, sometimes I wish I could convince myself it wasn't real. But I know what I saw that day in the Minnesota woods. And I know there are things out there we don't understand, and maybe aren't meant to. Story 9. I've been in law enforcement for 23 years. I've seen things most people couldn't stomach. Fatal car accidents, murder scenes, suicides, you name it. I've been shot at twice. I've had to draw my weapon more times than I care to remember. Nothing in my career prepared me for what happened last July. I'm not sharing this for attention or because I think anyone will believe me. I'm writing this because I haven't slept properly in months, and maybe putting it down will help. Maybe someone else has seen what I saw. It was July 15th, 2013, middle of summer in Michigan, hot and humid as hell. My partner Tom and I were off duty that day. We'd been hearing about this remote marsh area in Washtenaw County that was supposed to have some interesting wildlife. Tom's into photography, birds especially, and I just needed to get out of the house. We parked about a half-mile from the marsh and hiked in. The moment we stepped onto the trail, something felt wrong. I can't explain it exactly. It was like walking into a room and immediately knowing someone had been there, even though everything looks untouched. 20+ years on the force gives you a sixth sense about these things. You feel that? I asked Tom. Feel what? I don't know, something's off. Tom laughed it off. You're too paranoid, man. Too many years on patrol. Maybe he was right. We continued down the trail toward the marsh. It was around 2 in the afternoon, but the forest canopy made it seem darker. The humidity was suffocating, my uniform shirt sticking to my back within minutes. About a quarter-mile in, I noticed how quiet it had gotten. Michigan woods in July should be noisy. Birds, insects, small animals scurrying around, but there was nothing. Just the sound of our boots on the trail and our breathing. Listen, I said. Tom stopped. To what? Exactly. Nothing. He frowned, finally noticing it too. Weird. Maybe there's a predator nearby, coyote or something. We kept going, more alert now. The trail narrowed as we approached the marsh and the trees got thicker. The silence was making me increasingly uneasy. I kept my hand near my hip even though I wasn't carrying my service weapon. Just habit, I guess. That's when we heard it. A loud crack from deeper in the woods, like a thick branch breaking. Not a twig. This was something substantial. Tom froze mid-step. Deer, he whispered. I shook my head. Too loud for deer. We stood still, listening. Another crack, closer this time, then another. Whatever was making that noise was big and moving toward us. Black bear, maybe, Tom suggested, but his voice had that edge to it now. I've encountered black bears before. They don't move like that, and they're usually noisy in different ways, rustling through undergrowth, not systematically snapping branches. We continued cautiously, approaching the edge of the marsh. The ground became spongier, water pooling around our boots. Tom spotted what looked like a crude structure ahead. A collection of large sticks and branches formed into something resembling a nest or shelter. It was about 7 feet off the ground, wedged between 3 trees. Check this out, he said, heading toward it. While Tom examined the structure, I took out my phone and started taking photos, doing a slow 180-degree sweep of the area. That's when I saw it. About 50 yards away, partially obscured by a large oak tree, was something. At first I thought it was just part of the tree, maybe unusual bark or a growth, but then I realized what I was looking at was either standing behind the tree or holding onto it. The hairs on my neck stood up. "Tom," I said quietly, "don't make any sudden movements, but look over at that big oak." He turned slowly, squinting in the direction I was pointing. "I don't..." He started, then went completely silent. What we were looking at wasn't the typical black ape-like creature you hear about in Bigfoot stories. This thing had thick reddish-brown hair covering its head, shoulders, right arm, waist, and down to its knees. It was tall. My best estimate is over 8 feet. It appeared to be climbing up or down the tree, one massive arm wrapped around the trunk. Neither of us moved. I kept taking photos, trying to keep my hands from shaking. My brain was struggling to process what I was seeing. In my peripheral vision, I noticed movement in the trees to the left. I slowly shifted my gaze. Jesus Christ. There was a second one. This creature was different, lighter colored with what looked like blonde hair. Its face was partially visible, and I could make out what appeared to be reddish lips. The shape of its head was wrong somehow. Elongated, more like what people describe when they talk about werewolves than anything ape-like. My mouth went dry. 23 years of law enforcement training, and all I could think was, run, but I couldn't move. The strangest part was the feeling that came over me. It wasn't just fear. It was something deeper, more primal, like I was in the presence of something that hated me. Not the way a person might hate another person, but something ancient and powerful. A hatred so intense it felt physical, like a wave of energy washing over me. And yet mixed with this terror was an inexplicable sense of bliss. Like part of my mind was being lulled into a state of calm, while another part was screaming in panic. I've never experienced anything like it. This contradictory feeling of both terror and tranquility. Tom must have felt it too, because he whispered, "We need to leave, now." I nodded, unable to speak. We started backing away slowly, not turning our backs to the creatures. That's when the reddish-brown one moved. It wasn't a fast movement, just a slight shift of position that caused another branch to crack. The sound snapped me out of my daze. "Okay, let's go," I said, my voice barely audible. We backed away for about 20 yards before turning and walking quickly back toward the trail. Neither of us ran. Somehow, that felt dangerous, like it might trigger something. Once we hit the main trail, we picked up the pace. About halfway back to the car, Tom grabbed my arm. "Look," he said, pointing at the ground. There, in a patch of dried mud, was a footprint. Not a human footprint, not a bear print. This thing was 17 inches long at least, with 5 distinct toe impressions. I took several photos of it, placing my own size 11 boot next to it for scale. We made it back to the car without seeing anything else. But that feeling of being watched never left. I've been in dangerous situations before, but I've never felt as vulnerable as I did in those woods. That night, after getting home, I downloaded the photos from my phone. I was half expecting them to be blurry or to show nothing at all, like my mind had played tricks on me, but there they were. In 3 consecutive photos, you can clearly see the reddish-brown creature on the tree. In 2 others, the blonde one is visible among the branches to the left. I've shown these photos to Tom, but to no one else. What would I say? "Hey, look at these Bigfoot pictures I took." I'd be laughed off the force, but these weren't just Bigfoot. These were something different, something worse. The footprint photos are clear too, 17 inches long, half again as wide as my boot. Whatever left that print would tower over me, and I'm 6'2". It's been 5 months now, and I still wake up in cold sweats. Sometimes I dream I'm back in that marsh, but I'm alone, and those things are circling me. In the dreams, I can feel them projecting that strange combination of hatred and bliss. like they're trying to paralyze me with fear while simultaneously lulling me into a false sense of security. I've dealt with violent criminals, seen the aftermath of horrific crimes, and faced life-threatening situations. None of that compares to what I felt in those woods. There was something deeply wrong about those creatures. Not just their appearance, but their presence. Like they existed partly in our world and partly somewhere else. Tom and I have talked about going back with proper equipment, cameras, maybe weapons, but neither of us has made any move to do it. Deep down, I don't think either of us wants to experience that feeling again. I don't know what we saw in that marsh. I don't know if they were some undiscovered species or something else. What I do know is that nothing in my 23 years of law enforcement prepared me for the sheer wrongness of what we encountered. The thing that haunts me most isn't the creatures themselves, though God knows they were terrifying enough. It's that feeling they projected, that dark foreboding mixed with an almost hypnotic calm. Like they could have made us walk right up to them if they'd wanted to, like they were playing with us. I still have the photos. I look at them sometimes, trying to convince myself there's some rational explanation. There never is. I don't go hiking anymore. I don't even like being out after dark. Whatever was in those woods is still out there, and the thought that there might be more of them keeps me awake at night. I don't expect anyone to believe this. Hell, I'm not sure I would believe it if someone else told me, but it happened, and I'll never forget the hatred I felt emanating from those creatures. A powerful, ancient hatred that seemed to reach into my soul. Story 10. In the summer of 2011, I was working a high-stress job in San Francisco. After 3 months without a day off, I was desperate for some alone time in nature. I've always been an outdoorsy guy. Hiking, fishing, camping, it's in my blood. There's this spot about 4 hours east of the city in the Sierra foothills that I'd found a few years back. No official campground, just a small clearing off an old logging road that hardly anyone uses anymore. Perfect isolation, amazing stargazing, and usually plenty of deer tracks around if you're interested in that sort of thing. I packed up my Ford F-150 on Friday after work. Just the essentials: sleeping bag, small cooler with some beers and sandwiches, portable grill, and my old battery-powered radio. I didn't even bring a tent because the weather forecast was clear, and I love sleeping in the bed of my truck under the stars. I've got a foam mattress that fits perfectly back there, and with the tailgate down, I can stare up at the night sky until I fall asleep. I arrived at my spot around 7 in the evening. The sun was still up, but starting to dip behind the hills, casting long shadows through the trees. I remember feeling this wave of relief as I pulled into the clearing. Finally, some peace and quiet. The spot was exactly as I remembered it. A small open area surrounded by dense pine and oak forest, with a slight view of the valley below from one side. I could smell the dry summer grass and pine needles baking in the late afternoon heat. I set up my little camp, cracked open a beer, and grilled a steak as the sun went down. It was so quiet out there, just the occasional bird call and the wind rustling through the trees. By 9 o'clock it was properly dark, and the stars were incredible. I leaned back in my camping chair, finishing my second beer and just taking it all in. I remember thinking this was exactly what I needed. Around 10:30, I decided to turn in. I arranged my sleeping bag in the truck bed, used my duffel bag as a pillow, and settled in for what I thought would be a peaceful night's sleep. I must have dozed off quickly because the next thing I remember was jolting awake to sounds in the distance. At first I thought it was people. It sounded like voices. Maybe a group partying somewhere on the ridge about a mile away. I checked my watch, 1:27 in the morning. I was a bit annoyed that someone else was out here making noise, but it was far enough away that I figured I could still get back to sleep. But then the sounds changed. What had seemed like distant human voices transformed into something else entirely. It started as a kind of howling, but not like a coyote or wolf. I know those sounds. This was higher pitched, almost like a scream, but sustained in a way that made my skin crawl. Then another joined in, and another, until there were multiple, whatever they were, making these horrible sounds together. I sat up in my sleeping bag, suddenly wide awake. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I told myself it was just coyotes, or maybe mountain lions, though I'd never heard mountain lions make sounds like that before. But deep down, I knew it wasn't any animal I recognized. The screams got louder, and I realized with a sickening feeling that they were getting closer. Whatever was making those sounds was moving toward me, and fast. Then I heard crashing through the underbrush. Not just footsteps, but the sound of small trees snapping, bushes being crushed underfoot. It sounded big, way bigger than a deer or even a bear. I scrambled to find my flashlight, my hand shaking so badly I dropped it twice before I could turn it on. I didn't know whether to hide or make a run for the truck cab. Before I could decide, the crashing sounds grew louder, and I realized whatever it was, there wasn't just one. The sounds were coming from slightly different directions, converging on my clearing. The screaming changed then. It became deeper, more guttural, almost like roaring mixed with those high-pitched screams. It was so loud now that my ears physically hurt. I've never heard anything like it before or since. It was the kind of sound that bypasses your conscious mind and triggers something primal in your brainstem that says, "Danger, run." That's when the smell hit me. Oh God, the smell, like rotting meat left in the sun for days, mixed with stale urine and skunk spray, but magnified 100 times. It was so strong and sudden that I gagged and almost threw up. The smell seemed to arrive before whatever was making it, like a wave of putrid air pushing ahead of the creatures. I felt the ground actually vibrate under my truck. Something massive jumped over a fallen log at the edge of the clearing. I could hear the thud when it landed. My flashlight beam caught just a glimpse of movement in the trees, but nothing clear, just shadows moving impossibly fast for their size. I was paralyzed with fear. My whole body was shaking and I couldn't seem to make myself move. I just sat there, in the bed of my truck, clutching my flashlight like it was some kind of weapon. The rational part of my brain kept trying to explain what was happening. A bear, maybe several bears, or wild hogs. But nothing made sense. Bears don't move that fast. Bears don't scream like that. Something large circled the perimeter of the clearing, just beyond where my flashlight could reach. I could hear its breathing, heavy, ragged, almost like it was snorting or huffing. Then there was a moment of complete silence. Everything went quiet, even the normal forest sounds. That silence terrified me more than the screams. I managed to pull myself together enough to sit up straighter and point my flashlight toward where I'd last heard movement. That's when I saw it, just for a second as it moved between two trees. It was massive, much bigger than a person, maybe 7 or 8 feet tall, but hunched over and broad. The shape was all wrong for a bear. It was standing on 2 legs, but the proportions weren't human. The silhouette showed long arms that seemed to hang almost to the ground. It was covered in what looked like dark, matted fur. I couldn't see a face, just the outline against the trees behind it. As soon as my flashlight beam hit it, it moved, faster than something that size should be able to move. It disappeared back into the forest, but I could hear it circling around, joined by at least one other. They moved through the brush with purpose, like they were coordinating somehow. That's when I snapped out of my paralysis. I dove into the cab of my truck through the back window, fumbling with my keys so badly that I dropped them on the floor. I was hyperventilating, tears streaming down my face without me even realizing it. I could hear them getting closer again. The crashing through the brush, the occasional scream that sounded almost like words, but not quite. I finally got the key in the ignition and started the truck. The headlights came on, illuminating the clearing and the tree line beyond. I caught movement again, something dark retreating quickly into the shadows. I didn't wait to see more. I threw the truck in reverse, spun around so fast I nearly tipped over, and then gunned it down the logging road. I was driving way too fast for that rough dirt track, bouncing so hard that my head hit the roof of the cab multiple times. I didn't care. I just needed to get away. In my rear-view mirror, I thought I saw something large moving on the road behind me, but it could have been shadows from my taillights. I didn't stop driving until I hit the main highway, and even then, I kept going until I reached a 24-hour gas station about 40 miles away. I pulled in, hands still shaking so badly I could barely turn off the engine. I sat there for almost an hour, trying to process what had happened. My sleeping bag, cooler, portable grill, everything I'd left in the clearing was still there. There was no way I was going back for any of it. Not that night. Not ever. I drove all the way back to San Francisco that night, arriving as the sun was coming up. I called in sick to work and spent the day in my apartment with all the doors locked, trying to convince myself I'd just experienced some kind of weird wilderness panic attack. But I knew what I'd seen, what I'd heard, what I'd smelled. I've spent countless hours since then researching animal sounds, trying to find something that matches what I heard that night. I've read about bear encounters, mountain lion behavior, even the effects of certain mushrooms that might cause hallucinations. If accidentally ingested, nothing fits. The only thing that comes close are other people's accounts of Bigfoot encounters. I know how that sounds. Before this happened, I would have laughed at anyone who claimed they saw Bigfoot. Now I don't know what to believe. All I know is that whatever was in those woods that night wasn't something that's supposed to exist. I sold my truck 6 months later. Couldn't stand to look at it anymore. I've never gone camping alone again, and I stay far away from secluded areas, especially at night. I still have nightmares about those screams, about that smell, about the silhouette I saw between the trees. Sometimes I wake up convinced something is outside my bedroom window watching me. Maybe it was just bears. Maybe my mind played tricks on me after being alone in the wilderness. But deep down, I know what I experienced wasn't normal. Something was out there in those California hills, something that shouldn't exist. And I think it was hunting me. Story 11. I've never shared this with anyone outside my family. I'm not even sure why I'm typing it out now, except that it's getting harder to deal with alone. Maybe someone here has experienced something similar and can tell me I'm not losing my mind. I run Cedar Pines Kennel on our 20-acre property in East Texas, about 40 minutes outside of Lufkin. We're pretty isolated out here. Our nearest neighbor is almost a mile down the road, and we're surrounded by thick pine forest on 3 sides. My husband, Mike, inherited the land from his grandparents, and we built our house and the kennel business about 8 years ago. The kennel is my pride and joy. I've always loved animals, and I built a reputation for taking good care of people's pets when they're away. I've got 12 separate dog runs with heated indoor-outdoor kennels that can house up to 20 dogs comfortably. We're usually at capacity during holidays and summer vacation season. My routine has always been the same. I check on the dogs throughout the day and make one final check around 10 at night before bed. Our bathroom has a perfect view of the kennel area. It's about 30 yards from the house, and I can see all the runs from the window. I learned early on not to turn on the bathroom light when I look out because the glare on the glass makes it impossible to see anything. What happened 3 weeks ago has turned my peaceful life upside down. It was a Tuesday night in late October. Mike works second shift at the paper mill, so he doesn't get home until around 1 in the morning. My mother lives with us and helps with my 2 kids, Emma's 11 and Tyler's 8. That night, everyone was asleep except me. I was washing my face before bed when I glanced out the window toward the kennels. That's when I saw it. There was a figure standing near the edge of the dog runs. At first, I thought it might be Mike home early, but this was bigger, much bigger. The security light on the kennel building cast enough glow that I could make out the silhouette clearly. Whatever it was stood at least 7 feet tall, maybe 8, and was covered in what looked like dark hair or fur. The thing that struck me immediately was the silence. We had 14 dogs staying with us that night, including a couple of hunting hounds that bark if a leaf blows wrong. But there wasn't a sound, not one bark or whimper. I squinted, trying to see better, and noticed all the dogs were inside their houses, not a single one visible in the outdoor runs. The figure just stood there, completely still, as if surveying the kennels. Then it turned its head eastward, toward the deeper part of the woods. It took 3 slow, deliberate steps in that direction, then stopped and pivoted north. The movement wasn't like a person. It was too fluid, too careful. It seemed to be listening for something. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I was frozen in place, afraid to move away from the window in case it saw me, but terrified to keep watching. I finally managed to back up and hurry to my mother's room. "Mom," I whispered, shaking her shoulder. "Mom, wake up. There's something outside by the kennels." She grumbled, but got up and followed me back to the bathroom. When she looked out the window, she gasped and grabbed my arm so hard it left marks. "What is that?" she whispered. "I don't know," I said, "but it's huge." We watched as the figure stood there for maybe another minute, then slowly turned and walked into the woods. Not ran, walked, like it wasn't afraid of anything, like it owned the place. I didn't sleep that night. I kept the blinds closed and checked the locks on all the doors and windows 3 times. When Mike got home, I told him what we'd seen. He looked concerned but tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a hunter trespassing, wearing some kind of ghillie suit. Maybe it was someone trying to mess with us. But deep down, I knew it wasn't a person. The next few nights were quiet, and I started to think maybe it had been a one-time thing. Then, 5 nights later, I heard it. I was putting dishes away in the kitchen when a sound came from the woods behind the kennels. It started as a low moan that built into something between a scream and a howl. It lasted maybe 6 seconds, but it made every hair on my body stand up. The dogs went absolutely crazy, barking, whining, some of them actually throwing themselves against the chain link of their runs. I froze in place, the plate I was holding slipping from my fingers and shattering on the floor. Emma came running into the kitchen. "Mom, what was that?" she asked, eyes wide with fear. "I don't know, honey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Probably just a bobcat or something." But it wasn't a bobcat. It wasn't a coyote or a wild hog or any other animal native to East Texas. I've lived in these woods my whole life, and I've never heard anything make a sound like that. That night, I saw it again. Same spot by the kennels, same stillness. This time it seemed to be looking directly at the house, at my window. I ducked away quickly, heart hammering in my chest. When I gathered the courage to look again about 30 seconds later, it was gone. Since then, it's come back every few nights. Sometimes it just stands there, watching. Other times it moves around the property, always staying just at the edge of the woods. Twice I've seen it approach the kennels, moving right up to the chain link fence, causing the dogs to cower in their houses. Once, it reached a long arm over the top of a fence. The run was empty that night, thank God. The screams have continued too. Always at night, always from different directions in the woods. Tyler has heard them now too, and refuses to play outside after dark. Emma won't even take the trash out if the sun is setting. I can't blame them. I don't want to go outside either. Mike has heard the screams only once. He was coming home from work and had just pulled into our driveway when it happened. He said it sounded like a woman being murdered, but wrong somehow. He grabbed his shotgun and walked the property line, but found nothing. The worst incident happened just 3 nights ago. I woke up around 3 in the morning to the sound of the dogs going absolutely ballistic. I went to the bathroom window and saw the figure standing right in the middle of the kennel area, moving slowly between the runs. The security light illuminated it better than I'd seen before. It was massive, with impossibly long arms that hung down past its knees. The hair covering its body was dark brown or black and matted in places. Its head sat directly on broad shoulders, almost no neck visible. And though I couldn't make out its face clearly, I could see that it was watching the house as it moved. I woke Mike up, but by the time he got to the window, the thing had moved to the edge of the property. Mike grabbed his gun and rushed outside despite my begging him not to. He was out there for 20 minutes, sweeping his flashlight across the tree line, but found nothing. The next morning, though, we discovered deep impressions in the soft ground around the kennels, footprints nearly 16 inches long. I've ordered motion sensor lights for the entire property. They'll be delivered tomorrow, and Mike's going to install them this weekend. I'm hoping the bright lights will discourage whatever this thing is from coming so close to the house, but I'm not confident they'll be enough. I haven't told anyone outside my family about this. East Texas is full of Bigfoot stories, and I've always rolled my eyes at them. Now, I'd be the laughing stock of the community if I said anything. People would think I was making it up for attention or that I was seeing things, but my mother has seen it, my husband has heard it, my children are terrified of it. Last night, I sat up with my mother in the living room until dawn. We heard it moving through the brush about 50 yards from the house, snapping branches and making a strange, huffing sound. At one point, it screamed so loudly that the windows seemed to vibrate. My mother started crying, and I just held her hand as we sat there in the dark, listening. Mike works late again tonight. The kids are sleeping in my mother's room because they're too scared to be alone. I'm sitting here with the lights off, listening to every sound outside. Something just crashed in the woods behind the house. The dogs aren't barking. They've gone completely silent again. I think it's closer tonight than it's ever been. I can hear heavy breathing outside the window to my right. The motion sensor on the porch just triggered, but I'm afraid to look. My hands are shaking so badly I can barely type. What do I do? How do I protect my family from something I don't understand? Will it eventually lose interest and leave us alone? Or is it just getting bolder? The porch swing just creaked. Something is out there, and it's not the wind. Story 12. I've thought 100 times about whether I should share this. Most people would think I'm making it up or that I've lost my mind. But I need to tell someone who might understand or have experienced something similar. I live on a decent-sized property near Thompson, Manitoba. It's pretty isolated, which is why I bought it in the first place. I wanted some peace and quiet after 30 years of living in the city. My backyard stretches out to a swamp that connects to a river system about half a mile away. Usually it's paradise. Watching wildlife, hearing the sounds of nature, no neighbors blasting music at 3 in the morning. What happened last August changed everything for me. It was August 27th, 2021. The date is burned into my brain. It was hot that day, around 80 degrees, and I was outside working on my truck. My 2 dogs, Cooper and Hank, were running around the yard like they always do. They're good boys. Cooper's a German Shepherd mix, and Hank's a black lab. They've always been my early warning system for anything unusual on the property. Around 5 in the afternoon, both dogs suddenly went ballistic. Not their normal "there's a squirrel" bark, but something urgent and anxious. Cooper was standing rigid, hackles raised, staring toward the edge of the property where it meets the swamp. Hank was pacing back and forth, whining between barks. Something wasn't right. "Cooper! Hank, come here!" I called them, but they wouldn't budge. They just kept barking, growing more frantic by the second. I walked over, grabbed both by their collars, and practically dragged them inside the house. They fought me the whole way, something they've never done before. Once I got them inside, they immediately ran to the windows facing the backyard, still barking and whining. I figured it was probably a bear or maybe a wolf. We get them sometimes, especially near the swamp. I went back outside to see what had spooked them so badly. That's when I noticed several deer, I think 4 or 5 of them, running full speed across my yard toward the swamp. They weren't just trotting, they were in a panic, like something was chasing them, but there was nothing behind them. I stood there for a minute, confused. The dogs were still going crazy inside. Everything felt wrong. You know that feeling when the air pressure changes before a storm? It was like that, but worse, like something fundamental had shifted. I started walking toward the edge of my property where the tall grass begins. The grass there gets about 5 feet high in late summer. It's a mixture of cattails and other swamp plants. I was maybe 30 feet from the grass line when I stopped. That's when I saw it. About 20 feet away, a long, thick arm covered in jet black hair slowly reached out from behind the tall grass. I'm not exaggerating when I say it was the most terrifying thing I've ever seen. The arm was massive, had to be at least 4 feet long. The hand at the end was enormous, probably 12 to 14 inches from palm to fingertips, with skinny, long fingers. The fingers moved with purpose, like they were feeling the air. I froze completely. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't even think clearly. My brain was screaming that what I was seeing wasn't possible. The worst part was how human-like the movement was. It wasn't like watching an animal. The arm moved with intelligence, with curiosity, the fingers flexing and exploring the air around it. It reminded me of someone feeling around in the dark, trying to get their bearings. But this was happening in broad daylight. I couldn't see the body or face of whatever it was attached to. The grass was too thick. Just this massive, hairy arm extending out like something from a nightmare. As I stood there, paralyzed, the most bone-chilling sound echoed from deeper in the swamp. It was like a deep, powerful whoop. Not quite a howl, not quite a call, something entirely different. The sound was so loud and so deep that I could feel it vibrate in my chest. It was answered immediately by another whoop from what seemed like farther away, in a slightly lower key. 2 of them communicating. The moment the first whoop sounded, the arm pulled back into the grass with surprising speed. 1 second it was there, the next it was gone. That broke my paralysis. I turned and ran for my house like I've never run before. I'm not ashamed to admit I was terrified. I slammed the door behind me, locked it, and closed all the blinds. My dogs were still freaking out, running from window to window. I sat in my living room in the dark as night fell, afraid to turn on any lights. I kept replaying what I'd seen in my head, trying to convince myself it was just a bear or some other animal. But I knew it wasn't. The arm was too long, too human-like. The hand was nothing like a bear's paw, and those whoops. I've lived in the wilderness most of my life and never heard anything like that. As I sat there in the dark, other things started to make sense. Throughout the summer, I'd been hearing strange sounds at night. Whoops in the distance, knocking sounds like someone hitting trees with a baseball bat, and occasionally heavy footsteps around the property. I'd always brushed them off as normal wildlife sounds. Now I wasn't so sure. About a month before this happened, I'd found a half-eaten deer carcass at the edge of my property. It had been torn apart in a way I couldn't explain, not like wolves or bears would do it. Parts were missing, and it had been placed in a strange position, almost displayed. I'd convinced myself it was just scavengers, but now I didn't sleep at all that night. Every sound outside made me jump. Around 3 in the morning, I heard heavy footsteps circling my house, slow, deliberate steps that no human would make. They were too heavy, too widely spaced. My dogs were huddled against me, whimpering quietly. When morning finally came, I waited until the sun was fully up before venturing outside. I grabbed my shotgun, something I rarely do on my own property, and carefully checked around the house. In the soft ground near where I'd seen the arm, I found footprints, massive footprints, easily 17 or 18 inches long. They were pressed deep into the mud, suggesting whatever made them was incredibly heavy. They led from the swamp, across the edge of my property, and back into the swamp in a different spot. That was almost 2 years ago now. Since then, I've completely changed how I live here. I never stay outside after dark. I installed motion sensor lights all around the property. I lock all windows and doors by 5 p.m., regardless of the season. My dogs don't go out alone anymore, especially near dusk. I've heard the whoop several more times since then, always at a distance, always answered by another. Sometimes at night, I hear heavy footsteps circling my property, staying just out of reach of the motion lights. Occasionally I find strange arrangements of sticks or rocks near the swamp edge that I know I didn't make and that couldn't have formed naturally. I've set up a trail camera facing the swamp's edge. So far I haven't captured anything definitive, just shadows, movement in the grass, and once what looked like the same arm reaching toward the camera before the video cut out. The camera was fine when I checked it, but the batteries were completely drained. I've researched extensively since my encounter. Everything points to what people call a Sasquatch or Bigfoot. I know how that sounds. Before this, I would have laughed at anyone who claimed to have seen such a thing. Now I'm the one afraid to tell people what I saw. What I keep coming back to is the intelligence in that movement, the way the fingers explored the air, the communication between at least two of these creatures, the fact that they've never tried to break in or hurt me. Despite clearly being powerful enough to do so, it's like they're curious about me, studying me the same way I'm trying to study them. I still live here. I've thought about moving, but this is my home. Instead, I've established what feels like an unspoken boundary. I don't go near the swamp, and they don't come too close to my house, at least not when I'm watching. I don't know what else to say. I know what I saw. I know what I continue to hear and sometimes see glimpses of. I've started leaving food out occasionally, fruit and vegetables mostly, at the edge of my property. It's always gone in the morning. I'm not sure what I'm hoping for by sharing this. Validation maybe, or just to know I'm not alone in experiencing something I can't explain. All I know is that my view of what's possible in this world has fundamentally changed since that August afternoon. There are things out there we don't understand, things that have likely been there all along, watching us from the edges of our world. Story 13. I've never told this story to anyone outside my immediate family before, but it's been eating at me for so long that I need to share it. What happened to me in Claybank Swamp still haunts me to this day. It was November 15th, 1962. I was 34 years old then, an experienced hunter who knew Manistee County like the back of my hand. I'd been hunting deer in those Michigan woods since I was a teenager, following in my father's footsteps. That day started like any other hunting trip. I woke up at 3:30 in the morning, had a quick breakfast of coffee and toast, and drove out to Claybank Swamp, my favorite hunting spot for years. The weather was typical for mid-November in Michigan, cold enough to see your breath, with a light dusting of snow on the ground that had fallen the night before. Perfect tracking conditions. I remember thinking it was going to be a good day. Funny how wrong a person can be. I arrived at my usual parking spot around 4:45, grabbed my rifle, a Remington 30-06 that had belonged to my father, and my small pack with some sandwiches, a thermos of coffee and basic supplies. I also had my .357 Smith & Wesson revolver in its holster, something I always carried for protection, though until that day I'd never imagined I might actually need it. My favorite hunting spot was about 1.5 miles into the swamp, a small clearing on slightly elevated ground with good visibility of a deer trail. I'd bagged a nice 8-pointer there the previous season. I settled in before dawn broke, positioning myself against a large oak with my back protected, facing northeast where I expected the deer to come from. The morning passed uneventfully. I saw a doe with 2 yearlings around 9, but no bucks worth taking. I ate my lunch, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches my wife Helen had made, around noon, and continued waiting. This was nothing unusual. Hunting is mostly patience. By late afternoon, I was getting a bit discouraged, but decided to stick it out until after dark. Sometimes the bigger bucks only move at dusk, and I was determined to wait. The sun was already getting low, maybe 30 minutes before true darkness would fall. The woods were getting that strange, muted quality they get at dusk, where shadows stretch and your eyes start playing tricks on you. That's when I heard it. At first, I thought it might be a bobcat or maybe even a cougar, though they weren't supposed to be in Michigan anymore. But this was different. It was a scream that started low and rose to a pitch that made the hair on my arms stand up. It wasn't animal, at least not any animal I recognized from 30 years of hunting those woods. And it wasn't human either. It was something in between, something that sounded intelligent and wild at the same time. The scream came from the north, maybe 200 yards away. I froze, my rifle ready, unsure what to do. Then I heard a tremendous crack, the unmistakable sound of a large branch breaking off a tree, not just a twig or a small limb, but the kind of sound that comes from something powerful enough to snap a substantial branch. My mouth went dry. Whatever made that sound was big, real big. I'm not a man who scares easily. I served in Korea and saw things there that would turn your stomach. But something about that scream and the violence of the breaking branch sent a chill through me, unlike anything I'd ever felt before. I decided right then that I wasn't going to wait for full darkness. Something inside me, some primal instinct, told me I needed to get out of there. I gathered my gear as quietly as possible, slung my rifle over my shoulder, and began making my way back toward my car. The forest felt different now. Every shadow seemed to move. Every rustle of leaves made me twitch. I kept looking over my shoulder, unable to shake the feeling that I was being watched. About halfway back to my car, I became certain something was following me. It wasn't anything I could see directly, just glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision that stopped whenever I turned to look. The feeling of being stalked grew stronger with each step. I picked up my pace, no longer concerned about moving quietly. As I got closer to where I'd parked, I heard heavy footsteps behind me, not directly behind, but off to my right, moving parallel to my path. Whatever it was keeping pace with me easily, even as I began to almost jog. The footsteps were heavy, much heavier than a man's would be, and they were spaced farther apart, like whatever was making them had a much longer stride than any human. I could hear branches breaking occasionally, small ones this time, as it moved through the underbrush. When I finally broke through the tree line and saw my car, a 1959 Ford that suddenly looked very small and very far away, I felt a momentary relief. Then I sensed movement at the edge of the clearing and turned to look. About 35 yards away, standing behind some heavy swale grass, was a form. In the fading light, I couldn't make out details, but what I could see froze me in place. It was standing on two legs, much broader than any man I'd ever seen, and tall. God, it was tall. I'm 6 feet even, and this thing towered over anything human, 8 feet at least, maybe more. For a moment, we just stood there, me at the edge of the clearing, it partially hidden by the swale grass, watching each other. I could feel its eyes on me, though I couldn't see them clearly. There was an intelligence there, a presence that was undeniably aware. The thing didn't move toward me, but it didn't retreat either. It was just watching, assessing. I had the distinct impression it was deciding whether or not I was worth the trouble. I didn't wait to find out. I backed toward my car, never taking my eyes off the figure, and when my hand found the door handle, I yanked it open. I threw my rifle on the passenger seat and grabbed my .357 from its holster. I don't know what good I thought it would do against something that size, but holding it made me feel less helpless. I got in the car, slammed the door, and started the engine. As I pulled away, my headlights swept across the area where the creature had been standing. For just a second, I caught a glimpse of something massive moving back into the tree line. Something covered in dark hair, walking upright with a smooth, rolling gait that no man in a costume could ever imitate. I drove home probably 20 miles over the speed limit the whole way, checking my rearview mirror constantly, half expecting to see that thing running after my car. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. When I got home, Helen took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. I told her what happened, and to her credit, she didn't laugh or tell me I was seeing things. She could see how shaken I was. We agreed not to tell anyone else, who would believe it anyway. For years afterward, I avoided Claybank swamp entirely. I couldn't bring myself to go back there, especially not alone. It wasn't until 1966 that I finally returned, and even then I only went with 2 other hunters, and we stayed together the whole time. Over the years, I've heard whispers from other hunters and fishermen about strange encounters in that area. They call it the Claybank creature. A buddy of mine who fishes Pine Creek told me about a time he was upstream, standing in the water, when he turned and saw what he described as a Bigfoot watching him from just 25 feet away. He dropped his fishing rod and ran. I believe him. I've thought a lot about what I saw that day. Could it have been a bear standing on its hind legs? No bear gets that tall, and they don't move the way this thing moved. A man in a costume, out in the middle of nowhere in hunting season when people are carrying loaded rifles? No way, and nothing human could have made that scream or broken that branch with such force. Whatever I encountered that November evening was something that shouldn't exist according to science, but it was as real as the ground I'm standing on. I know what I saw, what I heard, what I felt. That feeling of being watched and followed through the woods is something I'll never forget. I'm 76 years old now, and I still hunt, though not as often as I used to. My reflexes aren't what they once were, but I've never again stayed in the woods after dusk. Not anywhere. And whenever I'm in the forest and the light starts to fade, I feel that same chill run down my spine, and I remember those heavy footsteps keeping pace with me through the underbrush. The thing is, I don't think it wanted to hurt me. It could have. It had every opportunity. But it just watched. Maybe it was just curious. Maybe it was protecting its territory, or maybe it was something else entirely. I don't know, and I don't want to know. All I know is that there are things in this world that we don't understand. Things that live in the shadows of our familiar places. And sometimes, if you're unlucky enough, you catch a glimpse of them. I did on November 15th, 1962, in Claybank Swamp, and I've never been the same since. Story 14. I've always been the skeptical type. Ghosts, aliens, Bigfoot. I rolled my eyes at all of it. My friends used to joke that I wouldn't believe in something even if it slapped me across the face. Well, that changed on January 17th, 2012. I still get chills thinking about it. I was doing some solo hiking in Ocala National Forest. It's this massive wilderness area in central Florida. Lots of pine forests, sandy soil, and isolated spots where you can go hours without seeing another human. I'd been there a few times before, but this trip I decided to explore some of the more remote areas. Big mistake. The morning started off fine. The weather was perfect, mid-60s, slight breeze, not too humid for Florida. I had my old Toyota 4Runner packed with supplies for a day trip, couple sandwiches, water bottles, first aid kit, the usual stuff. I also brought bear spray. Not that I expected to use it, I just always carry it when I'm in isolated areas. Around 1 in the afternoon, I turned onto this narrow Forest Service road. It wasn't on my original plan, but it looked interesting on my map. The road got progressively worse, more ruts, less maintenance. About 3 miles in, I hit this patch of deep, soft sand. If you've never driven in Florida's interior, the sand can be deceptive. What looks like solid ground can actually be like quicksand for tires. My 4Runner sank in up to the axles before I even realized what was happening. I tried rocking it back and forth, but that just dug me in deeper. Shit, I muttered, hitting the steering wheel. I was alone, with spotty cell service at best. I got out to assess the situation. The forest was quiet, that deep kind of quiet that makes your ears strain for any sound. Pine trees stretched in every direction, and the road ahead and behind was completely empty. I popped the trunk and grabbed my small folding shovel. Maybe I could dig out enough sand to get the tires on firmer ground. I was on my hands and knees, sweating and digging around the front right tire, when something hit me in the thigh, hard. It felt like someone had thrown a baseball at me. What the hell? I stood up, rubbing my leg. A rock about the size of my fist lay on the ground beside me. I looked around, confused. There was nobody in sight. Then I noticed movement across the road. Something shifting in the thick bushes about 20 feet away. My first thought was kids playing a prank, but this was miles from anywhere. No way kids would be out here. "Hello?" I called out. No response, just the faint rustling of leaves. That's when I heard movement behind me too, like something heavy shifting its weight through the underbrush. My skin prickled. I was being watched from both sides of the road. My heart started pounding. I'm not easily spooked, but being alone in the middle of nowhere with something circling me, it triggered every primal alarm in my body. I backed up to my car and grabbed the bear spray from the trunk. Whatever was out there, person, animal, whatever, I wasn't going down without a fight. The forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no insects, nothing. Just the sound of my own breathing. Then I heard it, a loud, prolonged hissing sound from the woods to my right. Not like a snake, more like air being forced through a tight space, but louder than any animal I'd ever heard. The sound went on for about 5 seconds, and it seemed to come from something big. That was enough for me. I jumped back into my car and locked the doors. My hands were shaking so badly, I dropped the bear spray between the seats. Through the windshield, I kept my eyes fixed on the spot where I'd heard the hissing. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the undergrowth about 15 feet into the woods parted and something rose up. I'll never forget what I saw next. Never. It was massive, easily 8 feet tall, maybe more. It stood on 2 legs like a human, but there was nothing human about it. The shoulders were impossibly broad and muscular, covered in thick black and grey hair. Its arms hung down past its knees, ending in hands that looked powerful enough to crush stone. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't even blink. It was a Sasquatch, a fucking Sasquatch, standing there, staring directly at my car. Its face was, God, I don't even know how to describe it, like a cross between a gorilla and a human, but not quite either. The brow was heavy, shadowing deep-set eyes that looked intelligent and aware. Too aware. Its mouth was set in what looked like a permanent scowl. It just stood there for what felt like forever, but was probably only 10 or 15 seconds. Then it turned slightly and moved eastward, parallel to the road. It walked upright, with this odd rolling gait that was both fluid and powerful. Then it disappeared into the trees. I sat frozen, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. Part of me was hoping it was just a hallucination from dehydration or something, but I knew what I'd seen. A minute passed, then another. I started to think maybe it was gone for good. I was reaching for my phone to try calling for help when movement caught my eye. About 30 yards down the road, it was peeking out from behind a massive pine tree, just its head and one shoulder, watching me, studying me. The intelligence in its gaze was what terrified me the most. This wasn't just an animal, it was calculating. In a panic, I hit the horn. I just laid on it, the blaring noise shattering the silence of the forest. The creature disappeared behind the tree for a second. Then, to my horror, it dropped to all fours and charged. It moved impossibly fast, like nothing that size should be able to move. In seconds, it had crossed half the distance to my car. Then it stopped abruptly about 15 feet from my vehicle, reared up on its hind legs, and did something I still can't explain. It flung something at my car. Some kind of brown, slimy substance that splattered across my hood with a wet thump. I was so focused on the disgusting mess on my hood that I almost missed what happened next. The creature dropped back to all fours and darted across the road, but it wasn't alone. Clutched to its side, carried almost exactly the way a human would carry a child on their hip, was a smaller Sasquatch. This juvenile was maybe 3 feet tall with lighter brown hair. It looked skinny, almost sickly, compared to the adult. Its arms clung tightly around the adult's neck as they moved. The adult's massive hand supported the smaller one's body with what looked like tenderness, protection. They vanished into the woods on the opposite side of the road. The whole encounter, from the moment I first spotted it until they disappeared, couldn't have lasted more than 2 minutes. But those 2 minutes changed everything. I thought I knew about the world. I sat in my car for over an hour, afraid to get out, afraid to do anything but watch the tree line for any sign of their return. My phone had no service. I was completely alone with what I'd just seen. Around 4:30, I heard the rumble of an engine. A pickup truck with 3 hunters inside pulled up behind my stuck vehicle. They helped dig out my tires and pull me free with a tow strap. I wanted to tell them what I'd seen, but the words wouldn't come. Who would believe me? I'd have sounded insane. One of the hunters noticed the brown substance on my hood. "What the hell is that?" he asked, poking it with a stick. It had dried somewhat, turning into a crusty, fibrous mass. "No idea," I lied. "It was on the car when I came back from taking a leak in the woods." He shrugged and wiped some on his fingers, sniffing it. "Smells like rotten vegetation, probably just some swamp muck that fell from a tree." I nodded and thanked them for their help. As soon as my car was free, I got the hell out of there, driving way too fast on that sandy road. It's been 11 years since that day, and I've told very few people about what happened. Most don't believe me. Some think I saw a bear. Others suggest I was dehydrated and hallucinating. A couple friends even joked that I must have gotten into some mushrooms while hiking, but I know what I saw. That wasn't a bear. It wasn't a man in a suit, and I definitely wasn't hallucinating. The thing that haunts me most is the way it carried that juvenile. That deliberate, protective gesture was so human. Whatever these creatures are, they care for their young. They have family structures. They're intelligent enough to coordinate, to use rocks as weapons, to hiss as what seemed like a warning signal to each other. Sometimes I lie awake at night wondering about them. Are they out there right now, moving silently through the forests while we sleep in our beds, oblivious? What do they think of us? Why did it throw that rock at me? Was it trying to scare me away from its territory, or was there some other reason? I've never gone back to that specific area of Ocala. I've actually avoided hiking alone altogether since then. Some knowledge changes you forever. I went from being the biggest skeptic among my friends to someone who jumps at shadows in the woods. I don't have proof. No photos, no video, no samples of that brown substance, just my memory and the absolute certainty of what I saw. If you're reading this and thinking I'm crazy or making it up, I get it. I would have thought the same thing before that January afternoon. All I can say is there are things in this world we don't understand, things that shouldn't exist according to science but do anyway. And if you ever find yourself alone on a remote forest road and hear that distinctive hissing sound, get in your car, lock the doors, and pray they're just passing through. Story 15. I've been hesitant to share this for years. Most people I've told think I'm exaggerating or making it up entirely. But I know what happened to me that day in November 2005, and I still get chills thinking about it. I've been hunting since I was a kid. My dad taught me everything: tracking, patience, respecting nature. By the time I was 30, I'd been on dozens of solo hunting trips without issue. This one was supposed to be like any other. The area outside White Court, Alberta, had been recommended by a buddy who'd had good luck there the previous season. It's remote, but not completely isolated. The kind of place serious hunters go when they want to avoid the weekend warriors. I'd done my research, got my permits, and packed my gear for a 3-day trip. I arrived late afternoon on a Thursday, drove my truck as far as I could on this old logging road, then hiked about a mile to find a good spot to set up camp. I found a nice clearing near a small creek, perfect for my tent, with easy access to water. After setting up camp, I still had a couple hours of daylight, so I decided to scout for a good hunting spot. About half a mile uphill from camp, I found this perfect game trail. You could see it was well used. Plenty of deer tracks, some droppings that looked fresh. The area had this natural funnel where two ridgelines came together, forcing animals to pass through a relatively narrow corridor. Any hunter will tell you that's gold. I spent the last bit of daylight setting up my portable blind about 20 yards off the trail. Nothing fancy, just a pop-up blind with a camo pattern, big enough for a chair, and my gear. I secured it well, made sure it wouldn't make noise in the wind, and headed back to camp feeling optimistic about the next morning. I woke up before dawn, made a quick breakfast, and hiked back up to my blind in the dark. By first light, I was settled in with my rifle, thermos of coffee, and enough snacks to last the day. The morning was crisp, probably around 30 degrees, with that perfect stillness you get in the woods before everything wakes up. For the first few hours, everything was normal. I saw 3 does around 7 in the morning, but they were too far for a clean shot. Around 9, a small 4-pointer crossed about 80 yards away. Not what I was looking for, so I just watched him pass. It was peaceful, just sitting there watching the woods come alive. Birds were active, a couple squirrels were chattering nearby. Normal forest sounds. Then around noon, something changed. It's hard to explain, but the woods just went quiet. At first, I thought maybe there was a predator nearby, a cougar or bear that had spooked all the smaller animals. I've experienced that before, but this felt different. The silence was heavier somehow. I started hearing something moving in the brush, circling my position, not directly approaching, just moving around the perimeter, maybe 30 to 40 yards out. The footsteps were heavy but deliberate, like whatever it was knew exactly how to move through the underbrush. It wasn't crashing around like a moose or elk would. This was calculated. I remember thinking maybe it was another hunter, so I stayed quiet, not wanting to spook any game or potentially put myself in danger by surprising someone with a loaded weapon. But then the footsteps started getting closer, and I noticed they didn't sound like a person. Too heavy, too widely spaced. My heart was starting to pound, but I kept telling myself it was probably just a moose or bear checking me out. I'd been in those situations before. Usually they catch your scent and move on. This didn't move on. It continued circling, getting closer with each pass. I could hear branches breaking now, not from carelessness but from sheer size. Whatever was out there was big. Then suddenly, and I still get goosebumps thinking about this, something slammed into the back of my blind with such force that I was knocked clean off my chair. My coffee thermos went flying, my rifle clattered to the floor, and I found myself sprawled out, disoriented and terrified. Before I could even get my bearings, I heard it, a roar that I can't even properly describe. It wasn't a bear roar, wasn't like any animal I'd ever heard. It was deep and long, and so loud that I could feel it vibrating in my chest. It felt primal, ancient. My entire body just froze. I couldn't move, couldn't think. It was pure, instinctual fear. I stayed completely still on the floor of the blind, barely breathing. My rifle was just inches from my hand, but I couldn't bring myself to reach for it. Some part of my brain was screaming that making any movement would be the worst thing I could do. For what felt like forever, I just lay there, listening. The thing, whatever it was still there. I could hear it breathing, moving slowly around the blind. Occasionally it would stop, and in those moments the silence was almost worse than the sounds. After maybe an hour of this psychological torture, the breathing got closer, right next to the side of the blind where my head was. Deep, rhythmic breaths, like something massive trying to catch my scent. I swear I could feel the fabric of the blind moving with each exhale. That's how close it was. I was trembling so hard I had to clench my jaw to keep my teeth from chattering. Sweat was pouring down my face despite the cold. My mind was racing through options, but there weren't any good ones. I was trapped, Then it shoved the side of the blind, not like before. This wasn't trying to knock it over. This felt like it was testing the material, pushing against it to see what would happen. The whole structure leaned inward, and I could see the outline of something pressing against the fabric. That's when I broke. Some survival instinct kicked in, and I just reacted. I scrambled to the corner of the blind furthest from whatever was outside, ripped open the zippered flap, and bolted. I didn't grab my rifle, didn't grab anything, just ran. I had no plan, no direction, just pure flight response. I was sprinting through the woods, jumping over fallen logs, crashing through underbrush. Behind me, I heard it immediately give chase. The sound of it moving through the forest was terrifying. Heavy footfalls, crashing vegetation, and occasionally that same roar, now sounding enraged. I don't know how far or how long I ran. My lungs were burning, branches were whipping across my face, tearing at my clothes. I fell multiple times, scrambled back up, kept going. The whole time, I could hear it behind me, keeping pace, not gaining much ground, but not falling behind either. Eventually, I broke through the tree line and saw my campsite below. I practically tumbled down the hill, my only thought being to get to my truck. I was sobbing by this point, gasping for air, my legs barely working. When I reached my truck, my hands were shaking so badly I could hardly get the key in the ignition. I kept looking in the rearview mirror, expecting to see whatever had been chasing me emerge from the trees. The engine started, and I floored it down that logging road, bottoming out multiple times, but not caring about the damage. I didn't stop until I reached the main highway, pulled over at a gas station, and just sat there, trying to process what had happened. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I had cuts and scrapes all over. My clothes were torn, and I realized I'd left behind thousands of dollars worth of gear, not to mention my rifle that had belonged to my grandfather. After a few hours of sitting there in shock, I called my buddy Dave, who lived about an hour away. I didn't tell him everything, just that I'd had a run-in with something in the woods and needed help retrieving my gear. God bless him. He didn't ask questions, just said he'd meet me the next morning. We went back the following day. I was terrified, but somehow having someone with me made it bearable. When we reached my blind, I couldn't believe what we found. The entire back panel was ripped open, not just the zippered door, but the actual material torn like paper. The aluminum frame was bent and twisted. My chair was broken into pieces. My belongings were scattered over about a 20-yard radius. But the most disturbing thing was the footprints. They were everywhere around the blind. Massive impressions in the soft forest floor, about 17 inches long, with 5 distinct toe impressions. They were spaced about 4 feet apart, suggesting whatever made them had an enormous stride. Dave saw them too. I needed that confirmation that I wasn't losing my mind. We gathered what was salvageable, including my rifle, which was miraculously undamaged, and got out of there as quickly as possible. Dave wanted to report it, but to who? The Forestry Service? The police? What would we say? That Bigfoot attacked my hunting blind? We'd be laughed out of the station. I never went back to that area, never went hunting alone again either. For months afterward, I had nightmares about that roar, about something massive chasing me through endless woods. I still don't know exactly what I encountered that day. I never got a clear look at it. But the sound of its roar, the incredible force when it hit my blind, the way it moved through the forest, and those massive footprints. I'm convinced it was a Sasquatch. Something that stood at least 8 feet tall, could move incredibly fast through difficult terrain, and showed absolutely no fear of humans. Some people have suggested it was a bear, maybe a grizzly. But I've encountered bears before. They don't move like that, don't sound like that. Others have suggested it was other hunters playing a prank, but no human could make those prints or that roar or tear through a blind like it was tissue paper. To this day, I can't explain what happened. All I know is that there's something out there in those woods that defies conventional explanation, something that didn't want me in its territory, and I was lucky to escape with my life. That's story 16. Sikadis, I've been hesitant to share this for years, not because I'm worried people won't believe me. Honestly, I don't care about that anymore, but because typing it out makes me relive every moment. My hands are already shaking just thinking about it. This happened in October of 2011. I'd been hunting in Manonga National Forest in West Virginia for years. I knew those woods well, or at least I thought I did. That particular morning, I decided to try a new area deeper in the forest that another hunter had mentioned might have good deer activity. It was about a 4-hour drive from my house, and I got there well before sunrise. I parked my truck on this isolated ridge. Seriously, the logging road I took was barely maintained, and I hadn't passed another vehicle for at least 40 minutes. I remember sitting there for a moment, drinking coffee from my thermos, watching my breath fog up in the cold October air. The forest was pitch black, and I felt that familiar excitement of the hunt. By the time first light came, I was already hiking down into this dense valley with my rifle slung over my shoulder and my pack on my back. I had water, some sandwiches, extra ammo, and basic survival gear. Standard stuff. The morning was crisp, maybe 35 degrees, with a light fog hanging between the trees. About an hour into my hunt, I was moving slowly, stopping every few minutes to listen and observe like you're supposed to. That's when I first noticed something wasn't right. There was this cracking sound behind me, like twigs snapping under weight. At first, I figured it was just a deer, maybe even the one I was after, but these sounds, they kept pace with me. When I'd walk, they'd walk. When I'd stop, they'd stop. The sounds always stayed about 100 yards back. Never closer, never further, just maintaining that distance. I've been around enough deer to know they don't behave like that. They either bolt or freeze. I decided to change direction to see if the sounds would continue following me. They did. I started getting that feeling, you know the one, where the hair on the back of your neck stands up. Something felt off, really off. That's when I noticed how quiet it had gotten. October in Manonga should be full of sounds. Birds, squirrels, the wind through the leaves, but there was nothing. Just the sound of my boots on the forest floor and those persistent cracking noises behind me. After about 30 minutes of this, I decided to sit down on a fallen log and just listen. Maybe whatever it was would reveal itself or move on. I sat there for maybe 10 minutes in complete silence. Then I heard it, a low, guttural growl from about 30 yards to my left. It wasn't a bear. I've heard bears before. This was different, deeper, more resonant. It made my chest tighten. Before I could even process what direction to move, I heard another growl from behind me. That's when my blood ran cold. There wasn't just one, there were at least two of whatever these things were, and they were coordinating, moving around me. I stood up slowly, trying not to make sudden movements. I chambered around in my rifle, more for my own comfort than anything else. I started walking back in the direction of my truck, not running yet, but moving deliberately, scanning the trees around me. The forest had gotten darker somehow, despite it being mid-morning. The fog had thickened, and the tall trees blocked most of the sunlight. I kept walking, faster now, my breath coming in short bursts. The sounds followed, no longer trying to be stealthy. I could hear heavy footsteps crunching through the underbrush. That's when it happened. About 50 yards ahead of me, something stepped out from behind a massive oak tree. I'll never forget what I saw. It was huge, at least 7 or 8 feet tall. It was covered in dark brown hair, matted in some places. But it wasn't a bear. It stood upright on 2 legs, with a massive chest and shoulders that seemed impossibly wide. Its face, God, its face. It was like something between an ape and a human, but wrong somehow. Leathery skin stretched over a prominent brow, and its eyes, intelligent, aware eyes that locked onto mine immediately. For a split second, we just stared at each other. My finger hovered near the trigger of my rifle, but I couldn't move. Then it opened its mouth and let out a roar that seemed to shake the very ground beneath my feet. The sound was like nothing I've ever heard. Part roar, part scream, entirely terrifying. I ran. I know they say you shouldn't run from predators, but in that moment, instinct took over. I turned and sprinted downhill, crashing through brush and brambles. Branches whipped at my face, cutting my cheeks and forehead. I could hear it behind me, heavy, fast footsteps and the cracking of branches. It was gaining on me. My lungs were burning. I'd dropped my pack somewhere, but I still had my rifle clutched in my right hand. Not that I thought it would do much good. Whatever was chasing me was too fast, too big. I reached a small creek bed and splashed across it, then dove behind a fallen tree, pressing myself into the mud and rotting leaves. I lay there, trying not to make a sound, despite my heaving chest and the blood pounding in my ears. The footsteps slowed, then stopped. I could hear sniffing, like it was trying to catch my scent, then more growls, not just from the one that had been chasing me, but answering calls from different directions. They were communicating. I stayed hidden for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes. Eventually, the sounds moved off, growing fainter until I couldn't hear them anymore. But I still didn't move. I was too terrified. When I finally got up, my clothes were soaked from the creek and covered in mud. I was disoriented, but I knew I needed to get back to my truck. I couldn't go back the way I came. That thing might still be there, so I decided to take a roundabout route, following the creek for a while before cutting back toward the ridge where I'd parked. The hike back was the most terrifying experience of my life. Every sound made me freeze. Every shadow looked like one of those creatures. I kept my rifle ready, though deep down I doubted it would stop whatever I'd seen. It took me 3 hours to get back to where I should have been in one. When I finally caught sight of the ridge where my truck was parked, relief washed over me. I was almost out. But as I approached the edge of the forest, about 100 yards from my truck, I saw it again. It was standing about 50 feet from the road, partially hidden behind a cluster of trees, just watching, waiting. It knew exactly where my truck was. It had followed me. Or maybe it had been there the whole time, anticipating where I'd end up. I stood frozen, half hidden behind a tree. It hadn't seen me yet. I weighed my options. I could try to make a run for it, but what if there were others? What if this was a trap? In the end, I decided to circle around, staying in the trees, but moving parallel to the road until I was directly across from my truck. The creature didn't move. It just kept staring at my vehicle. When I was positioned directly across from my truck, I took a deep breath and sprinted across the open space. I expected to hear that roar again, to feel heavy footsteps shaking the ground behind me, but there was nothing. I reached my truck, fumbled with the keys, and practically fell inside. I locked the doors immediately and started the engine. As I was backing up to turn around, I looked in my rearview mirror. It was standing in the middle of the road, watching me in broad daylight. It made no attempt to hide. It just stood there, those intelligent eyes following my movement. I slammed the truck into drive and tore down that logging road like a madman, not slowing down until I hit the main highway. I never went back to Manonga after that. I couldn't. A few months later, I ran into another hunter at a sporting goods store who mentioned he hunted in that area. When I told him roughly where I'd been, his face changed. He told me there had been other reports, other hunters who'd had similar encounters in that specific part of the forest. Some local people apparently won't go near that valley. They call it something in their dialect that I couldn't quite catch, but it translated roughly to the screaming place. I still hunt, but never alone, and never in West Virginia. Sometimes at night, I'll wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I can hear those footsteps following me, maintaining that 100-yard distance, waiting for me to let my guard down. I've looked into what I saw. Most people call it Bigfoot or Sasquatch. Some local legends call them wild men. I don't know what to believe. All I know is what I saw, and it was real. Those eyes were intelligent. That thing knew exactly what it was doing. They were hunting me as surely as I was hunting deer. What terrifies me most isn't the memory of what happened. It's the thought that they're still out there in those woods, waiting for the next person to wander into their territory, and the next person might not be as lucky as I was. Story 17. I've been hesitating to share this for years. I'm not the type who believes in cryptids or monsters or whatever. I'm just a regular guy who loves hiking and has spent most of my life exploring the outdoors. I've seen bears, wolves, all kinds of wildlife, but what I encountered on October 10th, 2011 changed everything I thought I knew about what exists in our forests. I'd been planning this solo hike in Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest for weeks. Nothing extreme, just a day trip to explore some of the more remote ridgelines. I'd hiked most of the popular trails in the area before, but I wanted to check out some less traveled paths. The weather was perfect that day. Crisp autumn air, temperature in the mid-50s, clear skies. I started around 7 in the morning, following narrow trails and old overgrown fire roads. The fall colors were just starting to peak. All those reds and yellows against the evergreens. I remember feeling so at peace. You know, just me and nature. I didn't see another human all morning, which was exactly what I wanted. By early afternoon, I'd covered about 8 miles, ridge hopping through some pretty challenging terrain. I stopped at this abandoned campsite to eat my lunch. Just a peanut butter and jelly and some trail mix, nothing special. I sat on this fallen log and noticed how quiet it was. No birds chirping, no squirrels chattering. At the time, I didn't think much of it. Sometimes the forest just goes quiet. After lunch, I decided to start heading back toward the main fire access trail. The sun was still high, but I didn't want to rush the return hike. The descent from the ridge was pretty steep in spots, with loose rock and roots to navigate. I was taking my time, watching my footing, when I came across something that stopped me dead in my tracks. There, in a patch of soft mud, near a small seasonal creek crossing, was a footprint. Not just any footprint. This thing was enormous. At first I thought someone was playing a joke, maybe some prankster with one of those fake Bigfoot printmakers. But as I crouched down to look closer, I realized this was no joke. The impression was deep, with clear definition. I always carry a small measuring tape in my pack for plant identification, so I pulled it out. The print measured 19 inches long. 19 fucking inches! It was over 7 inches wide at the ball and about 5.5 at the heel. I could clearly see 5 toe impressions. The stride length to the next partial print was nearly 5 feet. Here's the thing. I've seen bear prints, wolf prints, all kinds of wildlife tracks. This wasn't a bear. Bears don't have feet shaped like this. The proportions were all wrong for any animal I know, but it had a distinctly human-like shape. Just massive. The depth of the impression suggested whatever made it was incredibly heavy. I took a few photos with my phone, though the lighting wasn't great under the tree cover. I was already feeling uneasy, but curiosity pushed me forward. About 50 yards further down the trail, I found what looked like fresh feces. Again, I've seen plenty of animal scat in my time. This pile was huge, maybe 8 inches across, and consisted mostly of plant material. But I noticed something unusual. Crayfish shell remains mixed in. I was still trying to process what I was seeing when I felt it. That sensation of being watched. You know that feeling. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I had this overwhelming urge to look up. That's when I saw it, about 70 to 80 feet ahead, just off the side of the trail, partially obscured by a stand of young birch trees, was something, someone. A figure, standing perfectly still. My first thought was, that's a person. But within a split second, I knew that wasn't right. No human is built like that. This thing was tall, at least 7 feet, maybe more. Its shoulders were impossibly wide, and its chest looked like a barrel. The proportions were all wrong. Too muscular, too massive. I'd guess it weighed well over 300 pounds, all of it looking like pure muscle. The entire body was covered in hair. Not fur exactly, but hair. Dark brown with this reddish tint where the sunlight filtered through the canopy and hit it. Its arms hung at its sides, noticeably longer than a human's would be. We just stared at each other. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even think clearly. It was facing me, but its body was slightly turned as if it had been moving perpendicular to the trail when it spotted me. I couldn't make out its face clearly. It was partially shadowed, but I could feel it watching me. 5 seconds passed, 10, maybe 15. Then everything happened so fast I still have trouble processing it. The creature suddenly moved. Not a casual walk, or even a run like a human would move. This thing moved. 3 enormous strides covered half the distance between us in what felt like a millisecond, but instead of coming straight at me, it veered sharply downhill across the ridge slope. What I saw next defies explanation. This thing moved through dense forest, over fallen trees, across rocky terrain like it was nothing. In seconds, it crossed about 150 feet of the steepest, most difficult slope, dropped into the shallow valley below, and then, this is the part that still gives me nightmares, it climbed straight up the opposite ridge, not following a path, not zigzagging, straight up, a nearly 60-degree incline, and then it was gone over the top of the ridge. The most unsettling part? The silence. Despite its size, despite the speed, despite crashing through underbrush and over fallen trees, I heard almost nothing. Just the soft rustle of leaves like a breeze was passing through. No heavy footfalls, no breaking branches, just whisper quiet. Nothing that big should be able to move that quietly. I stood frozen for what felt like forever, but was probably only a minute or two. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. My mouth was completely dry. I remember thinking, "Move, you idiot, move now." I turned and started walking back up the trail, away from where the creature had been. Walk turned to jog, jog turned to run. I ran until my lungs burned, constantly looking over my shoulder, convinced it was following me. I made it back to my car in record time, hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. I locked the doors immediately and just sat there, trying to catch my breath, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. I've replayed that encounter in my mind thousands of times over the past 12 years. I've questioned myself, wondered if the isolation played tricks on my mind, but I know what I saw. The footprint was real. I have the measurements and blurry photos. The scat was real, and that creature, that was real too. What I saw moved with a grace and power that no human could match. The way it navigated that terrain at that speed, it was like watching an Olympic athlete perform in slow motion, except this was full speed and on impossible terrain. Its arms swung in perfect rhythm with each stride. Its body barely seemed affected by gravity. I never clearly saw its face, but I remember the slightly pointed head, the almost non-existent neck, those impossibly wide shoulders. The proportions were just wrong for anything I know exists. I've only told a few close friends about this. Most react with skepticism or concern about my mental health. One suggested I'd seen a bear standing on its hind legs, but I know bears. This wasn't a bear, not even close. I haven't gone back to that specific area. I still hike, still love the outdoors, but something changed for me that day. The forest doesn't feel the same anymore. I'm constantly aware that there might be things watching from the trees that science hasn't classified yet. Sometimes I wonder if it was as startled by me as I was by it. Was it just going about its day, foraging for food, maybe those crayfish, when some human stumbled into its territory? The way it moved, not directly at me but away, suggests it wasn't hunting me. It was escaping, removing itself from a potential threat. Since that day, I've done a lot of research on Bigfoot sightings in Wisconsin. Turns out there have been dozens of reports in the Chequamegon-Nicolet area over the years. Many describe the same reddish-brown hair, the same impossible speed and agility, the same silent movement through dense forest. The logical part of my brain still struggles with this. How could something that large exist in our forests without definitive proof? How could it remain hidden when humans have mapped and explored virtually every square mile of wilderness? But then I remember how it moved, how quietly it traveled, and I think maybe, just maybe, these creatures have adapted specifically to avoid human detection. I still don't know what I saw that day. I'm not claiming it was definitely a Bigfoot or Sasquatch or whatever label you want to put on it. All I know is that it wasn't human, wasn't any recognized animal species, and moved with a capability that still haunts me. The forest has secrets. That day, I glimpsed one of them. And now, every time I'm in the woods and feel that sensation of being watched, I wonder, is it out there right now, watching me from just beyond my line of sight, moving silently through the trees, waiting for me to leave so it can go back to its hidden life? I don't have answers, just questions and the memory of those 15 seconds that changed how I see the world. Whatever it was, it shares these forests with us. It always has. We just don't notice it. And maybe that's exactly how it wants it to be. Story 18. I've never told this story outside of my closest friends and family. Even with them, I could tell they didn't fully believe me, but it happened and I've carried it with me for 14 years now. It was late March or early April of 2009. I remember because the dogwoods were starting to bloom, but the weather still had that spring chill that makes you keep a jacket in the car. I was driving southbound on Highway 75 between Helen and Cleveland, Georgia. Anyone who knows that stretch of road knows it's pretty remote. Winding through the foothills with dense forest on both sides. I'd been visiting some friends up in Helen for the weekend. Nice little tourist town, kind of a faux Bavarian thing going on. We'd had a few beers, not enough to impair my driving, I should add, and I was heading back home to Cleveland around 6:15 in the evening. The sun was getting low, casting those long shadows across the road. You know how it gets around that time. Not quite dark yet, but the light has that golden quality that makes everything look a little different than it does during the day. I had my window cracked open a bit, because I've always loved the smell of the Georgia woods in spring. I wasn't really thinking about anything in particular, just enjoying the drive, when I spotted something on the eastern shoulder of the road ahead. At first glance, I thought it might be a person standing there, but as I got closer, something seemed off about the silhouette, too big, I don't know, proportionally wrong for a normal person. My first thought, believe it or not, was that someone was playing a prank, wearing one of those gorilla costumes or something, but then I immediately dismissed that idea, because who the hell would stand on the shoulder of a highway in a costume at dusk? That's just asking to get hit by a car. I started slowing down, partly out of caution and partly out of curiosity. That's when the figure did something that sent chills through my entire body. It had been standing perfectly still, facing the woods, but as my car approached it slowly, very deliberately, turned its head toward me. I'll never forget that moment, ever. Our eyes met, and there was a flash of recognition isn't quite the right word, awareness, acknowledgement, like two intelligent species sizing each other up. Its face wasn't human, not even close, but it wasn't entirely animal either. The eyes were what got me, dark, but with a clarity and depth that I've only ever seen in the most intelligent animals, like dolphins or great apes. There was something there, something thinking behind those eyes. I must have slowed to about 20 miles per hour by this point. The thing was only about 30 feet away from me now. It stood maybe 6'2", possibly a bit taller, 6'4" at most. It had a slight hollow in its chest area, which struck me as odd. The proportions were generally human-like, 2 arms, 2 legs, a head. But the arms were longer than they should be, hanging down almost to the knees. The fur And yes, it was definitely fur, not clothing, was a medium to light brown color. It looked clean and healthy, almost shiny in the fading sunlight, not matted or dirty like you might expect from a wild animal. After we made eye contact, it did something else that I still think about. It didn't run away in panic like a startled animal would. It didn't charge at me aggressively. It simply turned, calmly and with purpose, and walked into the eastern woods. The movements were smooth, deliberate, human-like in their intentionality, but with a different rhythm, a different cadence. I wanted to stop, I really did. But there was hay baled up on the shoulder with plastic netting, and I couldn't safely pull over right there. I drove on for maybe a quarter mile, my mind racing, before I found a small private road heading north. I turned around, thinking maybe I could go back and, I don't know, look for tracks, take a picture. I wasn't thinking clearly. But by the time I got back to the spot, there was nothing, just the empty shoulder, the plastic-wrapped hay bales, and the dense wall of trees leading into the wilderness. Whatever I had seen was gone. I sat in my car for a good 15 minutes, just staring into those woods. Part of me wanted to get out and look for tracks or broken branches, any evidence of what I'd seen. But another part of me, a more primal part, knew better than to follow something like that into the forest as dusk was turning to night. I've been through every rational explanation I can think of. A person in a costume. The movements were too natural, too fluid, the eyes too alive. And who would wear such a thing out there, miles from any town, with no car in sight? A bear standing on its hind legs. Not with those proportions, not with that gait when it walked away. Some other known animal, nothing that exists in Georgia or anywhere, matches what I saw. The encounter lasted maybe 20 seconds total, but it changed something fundamental in how I view the woods around Helen, Georgia. Places I'd hiked dozens of times before suddenly seemed different, deeper, more mysterious, harboring secrets. I've read accounts of Bigfoot sightings since then. Some sound similar to what I experienced, others wildly different. I don't know what to make of that. Was my creature the same thing others have seen and called Bigfoot or Sasquatch? Maybe. But I've never been comfortable with those labels. They come with too much baggage, too many preconceptions. What I saw was real. It was intelligent, and it was aware of me in the same way I was aware of it. The detail that still haunts me most is how calm it was. It wasn't scared of me or my car. It wasn't aggressive. It simply acknowledged my presence and then decided to leave. Like I was the one intruding on its space, not the other way around. For weeks afterward, I had trouble sleeping. I'd lie awake replaying those few seconds over and over. The eyes, the deliberate turn of the head, the way it moved into the trees without hurry. I found myself driving that stretch of road more often than necessary, always around the same time of day, slowing down at that spot. I never saw it again. I told my girlfriend at the time, and she looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Later, after a few drinks, I told two close friends. One was fascinated but skeptical. The other just laughed it off as a bear or my imagination running wild. I stopped bringing it up after that. I've spent countless hours researching similar encounters online. I've read scientific papers about undiscovered species and the psychology of witness testimony. I've gone down rabbit holes about human perception and how the mind processes unexpected visual information. None of it has changed what I know. I saw something that shouldn't exist, according to our current understanding of North American wildlife. Sometimes I wonder if it saw something in me too, if it went back to wherever it lives and tried to explain to others of its kind about the strange creature in the metal box on the Black River that humans call a road. Probably not. It seemed too composed for that. Like seeing humans wasn't new to it. I still live in Georgia, though not in Cleveland anymore. I still hike those woods sometimes, but never alone, and never as the day is ending. I'm not exactly afraid. The creature showed no signs of aggression, but there's a reverence now. a respect for the unknown that I never had before. People sometimes ask me if I believe in Bigfoot. I usually dodge the question or make a joke. How do you tell someone that you don't believe in something you've seen with your own eyes? It's not a matter of belief anymore, it's knowledge. Uncomfortable, paradigm-shifting knowledge that doesn't fit neatly into how we're taught the world works. I don't have photos, I don't have plaster casts of footprints or tufts of mysterious fur. All I have is what I saw, what I felt, and the certainty that for a brief moment I glimpsed something our science hasn't accounted for. The woods feel different to me now. When I walk through a forest, I find myself constantly scanning the trees, listening more intently to the sounds around me. Not out of fear, exactly, but awareness. The awareness that comes from knowing we don't know everything, that there are things in this world, intelligent things, that remain hidden from us most of the time. Sometimes I dream about those eyes, about that moment of connection across the species barrier. In the dreams, the encounter lasts longer. Sometimes the creature speaks to me, though never in words. Sometimes I follow it into the woods. I always wake up from these dreams with a strange mixture of peace and unease. I don't expect anyone reading this to believe me. I probably wouldn't believe it either if someone else told me this story. But it happened. On a spring evening in 2009, on a stretch of Highway 75 in northern Georgia, I saw something that shouldn't exist, and it saw me too.